The camera's on now.
Am I on now? So I'd like to call the Common Council meeting of April the 8th to order, if I could bring everybody to their seats. And I'd like to start the meeting with a very positive announcement. We have 3 St. John Fire Department firefighters from our own St. John Fire Department who are going to receive the Certificate of Courage Award. And it's Captain Carl Conrad, Senior Firefighter Scott Gogan, Senior Firefighter Trevor Price. And we want to extend congratulations and best wishes to all 3 of those members and say thank you to the Fire Chief, Kevin Clifford. These 3 firefighters and our chief have been invited to the New Brunswick Association of Fire Chiefs, the annual conference award ceremony, which is going to take place during the month of May. And they will receive the Certificate of Courage Award. And this award is awarded to firefighters who have clearly distinguished themselves by displaying great courage while saving a life or by preventing substantial loss of property. In this case, they saved the life of one of our own citizens here in St. John at a fire on Waterloo Street. So we're very proud of their accomplishments and the courage that they have shown throughout their work. And I just want to say from all of us here, what a wonderful job they've done. And we certainly express our thanks and our appreciation and congratulations to them on behalf of all of us. So having said that, I now turn the meeting over to the Common Clerk and ask for our first item.
Your Worship, item 2.1 on your agenda, the minutes of March the 25th.
Could I have someone move the minutes, please?
Second.
On the question, any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk?
Next item, Your Worship, is the approval of the agenda, and there are a few additions. The first addition would be 16.1, and that's a request from city staff to add continuous improvement initiatives onto the agenda, and we would ask if council would consider allowing that to be done where in place of item 12.1 on the agenda. The next addition is from Committee of the Whole, and it's 17.1 on your agenda, and it would be for the sale of land on Mecklenburg. And the next item is 16.2 on your agenda, and that would be a request to purchase tickets for May Day dinner.
I am sorry. Okay. And do I have a seconder?
Seconded.
Common Clerk, is the 12.1 doesn't replace 12.1. It's just
No,
added,
it would
and we're
be-
moving the other items in 12
It would be
now.
exactly to do
Okay.
16.1 in place of 12.1.
Not in place.
Not in
Ahead of.
place.
Ahead of,
It's going to be
yes.
moved before 12. It's going to become a 12.1 and 12.1, and the other items are moved down. So anyway, that's clear. All those in favor of the agenda, please. Contrary minded, motion carried. Next item.
Item 4, Your Worship, disclosures of conflict of interest.
I don't think there is any. Oh, yes, city solicitor.
I filed a disclosure of interest with the clerk today with respect to item 5.10 on the consent agenda, so I'll excuse myself from the meeting during council's dealing with that item.
Okay, thank you. Next item.
Item 5 on the agenda is the consent agenda.
I'll move 5.1 through 5.14 inclusive.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
On the question, Councillor Armstrong.
I'd like to speak about 5.7, if I could.
Yes? Go
Want to do
ahead.
that now?
Yeah.
All right, okay. That's,
You're just going to ask a question or something?
I was just going to make a little comment, if that's all right.
Because we do have a presentation on asphalt later on. It's 12.
Yeah, but this is the awarding
Okay.
of the contract.
Fine, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. It's good to see competition. We've saved another $1 million in the contract again this year. So over 2 years, because of a new game in town, so to speak, we saved $2 million in asphalt. So I think that's something that should be known to the general public and to the staff. They've done a great job. So competition is good. It saved the city in 2 years $2 million. That's not chump change, folks. That's a lot of money. So I just want to say, good job on the staff, and for having competition is good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Deputy. 5.6, the tender for the concrete mixes. I'm just wondering, how does that work, since we don't have the RFP with us to have a look at it? Is it sold by you? You put it out for so many tons of it, you estimate the number of tons, and then you ask for a price per ton?
I have to get your light on here, I'm sorry. There you go. Oh, I took it off, did I? There you go.
Okay. Through you to the councillor. Yeah, this is an RFP for material delivery. So basically, it's the asphalt that we use in our regular maintenance programs. We use it in our St. John water cut reinstatement and our asphalt overlay program on a yearly basis. And we do have a certain amount allowed for in our operating budgets. So we put that out, and it is broken down into sort of what we call pre-season, prime season, and post-season, and we make award on that basis.
So when you do that, you look at the number of tons that you'd be using? Is that how it works? I'm just trying to figure out like how they come up with a price for this. Nebulous, like we've got potholes, you've got this, you've got that, you've got all sorts of things on the go there.
Yeah, we would have an estimated amount that we would spend annually for those programs, and we would include that in our tender call.
So year over year, would it be around the same amount you'd be ordering?
It has been approximately the same, yes.
Okay. Can I ask you about 510, the materials testing? Is that when it's initially applied? Or is that before the application of the materials?
Well, I guess as it comes to asphalt, it would be a number of things. A lot of testing during the application. Mm-hmm. So they would be checking temperatures, thicknesses, compaction of the asphalt as it's placed. They would also be taking samples of the material for testing in the laboratory after to make sure that it meets our specifications.
So when we lay that road down, will we have a guarantee from the person that, the company that does that? So if we didn't, I'm just looking at that, I mean, it's almost $700,000 in testing you're spending, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it,
Yeah.
but if I had bought a coat and it fell apart, I would take it back. You know, so do we have that opportunity to go back to the person or the company that did the road for us and say, you know, as well, in combination with that, of testing the materials and then, you know, judging breakdown, I guess? So,
Right.
So they don't look at it after that then? They look at it at the initial application and then we test later?
Yeah, they would test during the application and take material samples at the time. They wouldn't necessarily offer any kind of warranty on the work because it's not their asphalt. There's simply an independent material testing firm that we engage for our benefit to make sure we're getting what we're paying for.
Right, but the people that are providing the asphalt, do they provide a guarantee or no?
There is a warranty on the project, yes, and then they would also, the contractor would engage their own material testing company to sample that asphalt.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just wanted to make a comment on 514. The New Brunswick Dental Society has sent us a little bit of information on fluoride in water, and there is a lot of scientific literature that would support the addition of fluoride. And there was a plebiscite a few years back, and the City of St. John adopted that. Now, the last council voted against going forward with the new water system with that. So I personally, and as a councillor representing neighborhoods where there's a lot of poverty for children, that I'd like to see that looked at again. And so all of the information has been provided for you. Scientific literature is not really debatable. It is what it is, and it's all there for you. So if you understand scientific literature, you can read it, and you can know that there's a case to be made for having fluoride in your water. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether the Commissioner Water would like to comment on that, but I thought that when we put our new safe, clean drinking water plant in place, that we had made that decision, and then it's not able to handle it now, fluoride. Maybe he wants.
We should move that to 14 if we're going to start getting into briefings, et cetera, right?
Yeah, or is it just a short briefing on it now? If you want to press it.
Brent, just press it once and wait.
Here it is.
Good evening, Your Worship. Under the Safe Clean Drinking Water project, before it actually got started, Council made a decision at that point in time not to proceed with allocation of space for fluoridation of the drinking water. So that was a decision made up front, and it reduced the cost of the treatment facility, and there is no provision in the plant for fluoride.
Okay, well, I just wanted you to clarify that for the public for tonight, and now I'll go back and get a vote on the consent agenda. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried. Also, our next item, Your Worship. Common Clerk.
Yep.
It's just a technical little problem here. We're back. We're okay now.
Okay, and there.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Your Worship. Next item on the agenda, item 6, members' comments.
Okay, and just at the same time here, I'd like to say to all the members of the public that are here tonight, there's a lot of seats inside here if you'd like to come inside. I know you can watch it on television out on the outer hallway, but we got seats in here. You know, so there's some, at least 7 or 10 seats in here that are vacant. You're welcome to sit in here if you like. Okay, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. A few things tonight. Ken Palmer, just want to say congratulations to Ken Palmer. Everybody knows him down in Milford. He helped the Milford Community Center get a brand new stove. So the committee, and I think Greg knows the lady, if you want to say her name. I don't know her name there, Greg. Okay. Oh, it's been changed. Anyway, congratulations for the new stove. I want to thank 2 city staff because there was some garbage down the end of Bay Street. Got a phone call within 3 hours. They had it picked up. Tom McGrath and Amy Dobson, so a thank you out to them. That shows how things can get done fast. They picked up the garbage, and a lot of people to get down to C Street. If you don't know where it's at, it's on the west side. It's a very popular beach. Most people don't know it, but it's down beside Seaside Park. Also, Dave Alston reminds me that the Timber Top zip line is going to be opening within a month. He's added a couple new features, a couple new zip lines, so in the middle of the month that'll be opening of May. Talked to Tim O'Reilly. The Dominion Park Canteen is being updated, and that will be opening by the time the people want to swim and the lifeguards go on. So that's an uptime for the West Sider. And also the main thing that I like to say is, in case you didn't follow it, which most people don't, March 28th, history was made in the New Brunswick legislature. Our ex-councillor, Mr. Jerry Lowe, MLA for St. John Harbor, had the fair taxation voted on. This was major because the 2 parties, David Kuhn and Chris Austin, their parties voted in favor with all the Liberals to move it to a committee. And what that committee will do will be studying the fair taxation. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but everything will come out in that. Everybody will have a say, whether you're in heavy industry, whether you're just a general person in public, you all have a say. So this is huge news. The only disappointing part to me was that our MLAs, 3 cabinet ministers and 1 MLA from St. John didn't vote in favor of this. So, I mean, we have to speak as one. This helps every single person in the province of New Brunswick. We have the most industry, but this will help everybody, fair taxation. So I want to send out a big thank you to I was going to say Councillor Jerry Lowe, MLA Jerry Lowe, for getting this done. Because if you follow New Brunswick politics, this is the first time in history. 38 revisions have been made in the income tax, or the Tax Act, all in favor. None of them have been looked at, and nobody knows this. 38 changes over the decades, not one in favor of the people of New Brunswick. And I'm a little revved up, but I mean, I think it's good. It's going to committee, so thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Deputy. Thanks to 70 volunteers who came out to the Cherrybrook Zoo yesterday for their spring cleanup, and to the St. John Tool Library, who, doing what a tool library does, came out and brought shovels and rakes and tools to help out. You know, yesterday was like summer out there as opposed to today, now that we're back into winter. But I do know that on their Facebook site, the Cherrybrook Zoo is already starting to talk about summer and their summer zoo camps. My daughter found a love of shoveling poop and mucking about catching frogs, and it is a wonderful time for kids to be kids. So if you're interested in having your child out there this summer to have some fun, check out the information on their website, and thank you for supporting the Cherrybrook Zoo.
Thank you. Councillor Norton.
Thanks, Deputy. That time of year again, St. John Sports Hall of Fame is accepting nominations. So coaches, those in the sporting community, be sure to get those nominations off, so they have a tremendous cast to choose from. Also, just a reminder for those folks that are living along the Westfield Road area, particularly in the communities of Morna, Belmont, Ketapek, and the Accomack Road area, that the St. John Marina on April the 23rd will be having an open house from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and also later that evening from 6:30 to 8:30, as it relates to a proposed development by the Fundy Regional Services Commission. You can find out more on the Fundy Regional Services Commission webpage, and also look at the environmental impact assessment document that's there and the details as it relates to that open house. But I'd encourage the public and the community along that road to get out there and make sure that they ask questions, become informed on the project, and any concerns that they're there to speak to the experts. Other than that, it's River Watch time as well. You can sign up for the city's emergency alerts, and I'd encourage citizens to do that if they haven't done so already. And Councillor Reardon had an interesting point regarding fluoride in our drinking water. Any parents with young children, if you're watching this, I can't imagine if you have young children. But if you are and you want to watch this on replay, I would suggest that you contact your elementary school, because the elementary schools in the province of New Brunswick deliver a fluoride mouth rinse program, and students in grades 1 through 5 can participate in that. Once in a while there's bubblegum flavor and it's not too bad. I speak from experience myself, and I'd encourage you to do that. In the absence of fluoride, it's a free voluntary service provided through New Brunswick Department of Education in cooperation with the health authorities. So you can sign up for that and make sure that you're getting some supplemental fluoride mouthwash in your diet and prevent tooth decay in young children. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to congratulate a member of our community who spent a long, long time helping out St. Johners, particularly those that are in need. Speaking of Juanita Black, Juanita has produced the paper Around the Block for a number of years, and I just got my last copy that she'll be producing yesterday. So Juanita, if you're out there, happy belated birthday and happy retirement. I know that you're never going to fully retire. You'll always be involved here and there, but thank you for everything that you've done for the city of St. John. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. I just have one announcement, and there's a lot of people that are 50 plus in our region, and as of June 3rd to 7th, they have the 50-plus friendship games for all various sports, and they want people to sign up. They're not just here in St. John, they're also in Quetzmam-Sis, so they have great competition, and the person to contact is Ron Gogan, 672-8718. So I hope everybody goes out. They normally get a big crowd, but the more the merrier for those games. So thank you. So moving on, Common Clerk.
Next item, Your Worship, is a proclamation, 7.1 on your agenda. It's National Public Safety Telecommunication Week.
Whereas emergencies can occur at any time requiring police, fire, or emergency medical services, and whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas the safety of our police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens contacting the Public Safety Communication Center. And whereas the Public Safety Communication Center is the first link to citizens seeking emergency services. And whereas every year during the second week of April, the telecommunications personnel in the public safety community are honored nationally. And whereas April 14th to the 20th, 2019 is recognized as National Public Telecommunications Week. And whereas National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week is a time to celebrate and thank the Public Safety Communications Center operators for their compassion, understanding, and professionalism in the performance of duty serving the public. And whereas our Mayor, Don Darling, of the City of St. John proclaims the week of April 14th to April 20th as National Public Safety Telecommunications Week in honor of the men and women that work in that workplace. Next item.
Your Worship, still 5 minutes until the advertised public hearing, so if council obliges, we could move to 10.1 on the agenda,
Okay.
which is a proposed municipal plan amendment, policies and regulations.
And is that read out by the Commissioner?
No, in this case, I can go over it with council. So on 10.1 on your agenda, it's a proposed municipal plan amendment for policies related to regional retail centers. And as you will see from the letter in your council packet, a public presentation was made on February the 25th on this matter, and the required advertising was completed by the clerk's office. We did not receive any letters from the public on this matter, and council may now choose to refer this matter to the Planning Advisory Committee for report and recommendation and authorize the necessary advertising with a public hearing to be held on June the 3rd, 2019.
So do I have a seconder? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carried. We got room for one more time for one more.
Okay, and this next item is very similar, 10.2 on your agenda, and it's for a proposed municipal plan amendment for 1007 to 1019 Millage Avenue. And a public presentation in this matter was made on February 25th at council, and the required advertising has been completed. And we did not receive any letters from the public on this matter. And council may now refer this to the Planning Advisory Committee for report and recommendation and authorize a public hearing to be held on Monday, June 3rd.
On the question, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried. If we have, yeah, we might get, you want to try 10.3?
10.3, okay. Your Worship, 10.3 on your agenda is a weight restriction bylaw amendment staff report, and it would require first and second reading if council wishes to proceed.
Well, you have to go move first reading, but if we're going to have questions on it, I think we're going to have to wait on that one. Let's go to something. It's been moved and seconded for first reading. Moved by Councillor McKenzie, seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Reardon.
Is it just because that this rate restriction has come in the middle of this big job, or are we always going to put an amendment in so that heavy equipment can go back and forth?
Well, I have to have staff here. Just a moment. Here you go.
Yeah, so this...
Mr. O'Reilly?
Thanks, Deputy. So this particular amendment is a time-based amendment, so it's specific to this project, specific to a move of one crane out of the uptown area.
So if this project was happening again, it would, the weight restriction would apply, correct?
Correct. The weight restrictions are in place for all trucks within the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on the question, the first reading, all those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded, motion carried. Second reading?
Oh, I just have to read it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. A law to amend a bylaw respecting weight restrictions within the City of St. John enacted under the authority of Section 262, subsection 1 of the Motor Vehicle Act.
Okay, second reading. Moved and seconded on second reading. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried.
A law to amend a bylaw respecting weight restrictions within the City of St. John enacted under the authority of Section 262(1) of the Motor Vehicle Act.
Okay. Next item is public hearings. Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly.
Your Worship, next item is 9.1 on your agenda, and this is for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment with Planning Advisory Committee report recommending the amendment for 86 to 88 Regent Street.
So did everybody hear that outside? We're on our first public hearing for 86, 88 Regent Street. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak against this application? For the second time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak against this application? For the third and final time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak against this application? If not, is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of? This is 86, 88 Regent Street. Anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of? For the third and final time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of? If not, what is the wish of council? First reading would be in order.
Move first reading.
It's been moved for first reading. Any lights? No. On the question of first reading, all those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Second reading.
Second reading.
It's been moved and seconded for second reading at 86, 88 Regent Street. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, and the next item.
Your Worship, item 9.2 on your agenda is for a proposed municipal plan and zoning bylaw amendment with the Planning Advisory Committee report contained, which recommends the amendments for 40 Mountain View Drive.
Okay, I just need your help for a minute. We'll be right there. In 1 minute, I'll get you on. What's that mean? Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to do a staff presentation. Are you? Okay. You can put your, can you press it? And I don't know how to get out of here. It's just that this keeps doing this. Oh, there we go. What did you do? Okay, right here. I'm okay now. Okay, Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, Your Worship, members of council.
No. Just a minute. I don't do this every week, so you have to bear with me just a little bit, you know. Just give me a little slack, not too much. There you go.
Yes, Your Worship, members of council, tonight is a public hearing for a plan amendment, rezoning and Section 59 amendment for 40 Mountain View Drive for the Calibria Estates development. We do have a staff presentation plan, and I would introduce Andrew Reed, one of our staff planners, who will be providing a brief presentation for council.
Okay. Here you are. You're okay now. Why does it keep going to that? All right, is your mic on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good to go?
Go ahead.
We received a application for 40 Mountain View Drive. The proposal is for a 126-unit residential development consisting of a mixture of townhouses and one 6-story multiple-unit dwelling off Mountain View Drive in the city's east side to be served by a system of private streets. The first phase would consist of the construction of the 6-story multiple unit dwelling and the extension of what is currently Sonia Court into Via Calabria Street to serve the multiple unit dwelling and parking areas. The ownership scheme is intended to be through a condominium corporation with phase 1 on one PID and the remaining phase 2 on a second PID. To enable the proposal, the following planning approvals have been requested. To amend the municipal Schedule B of the municipal plan, the generalized future land use map, from low-density residential to low to medium-density residential. To rezone the property from high-rise residential and 2-unit residential to the integrated development zone. To amend existing Section 39 conditions and replace them with Section 59 conditions, and is sent to one or more subdivision plans and grant local government service easements. The subject property consists of 3.25 hectares of land located off Mountain View Drive. The subject property has been vacant since site preparations began in 2008 as part of a previous proposal. The Sonia Court cul-de-sac, as you can see in the aerial photo, was completed. That was done in 2015, including the water and sewer mains. The street was never vested to the city, so it remains private. In addition to that, a sanitary lift station was built to service the previous proposal, and that was intended for a larger 26-hectare area. Traffic signals were also installed at Mountain View Drive based on a traffic impact study completed in 2008. To the north of the subject property is a large forested land, and there are 2 single-family homes off Garnet Road further to the east. To the south, the property is buffered by a strip of land for public purpose. There are a mixture of other uses within the vicinity of the property, including a townhouse development across Mountain View Drive, large office building, public works depot, and the High Meadow Drive neighborhood. The proposal is well situated within 1 kilometer of many of the services and businesses of the McAllister Regional Commercial Area. So as per the previous proposal, the Sonia Court was built out and it terminates in a cul-de-sac. The current proposal would see this reconfigured for the purposes of providing access to the multiple unit dwelling. And there's an existing storm pond shown in these photos to the land for public purpose to the south. Under Schedule A of the municipal plan, the subject property lies within the Forest Hills Lakeside suburban neighborhood intensification area. So plan policy encourages suburban growth in these areas that assumes a more compact urban form with access to local and community services. And these areas are very important as they are targeted to receive approximately 40% of future growth and development in the city. Under Schedule B of the plan, the subject property is designated low-density residential. And the proposal would change this to low to medium density residential to permit the 6-story multiple unit dwelling. Policy in the plan for the low density residential caps building height at 4 stories, and for this reason the plan designation request was submitted. This added height is not anticipated to have any adverse effect. There would be approximately 58 meters between the proposed building and nearest residents, with further buffering provided as per landscaping plans. Policy LU4 of the municipal plan provides a mechanism for changing the designation to low to medium density residential, and staff are confident that the proposal meets the criteria to enable this change in designation. That full analysis is contained in the report, but I would say the proposal is notable for making use of existing infrastructure. The subject property is currently zoned high-rise residential and with a small portion of 2-unit residential. The integrated development zone has been chosen to provide added flexibility, so this zone functions by making the property subject to specific requirements outlined in the attached plans as opposed to the general requirements of the zoning bylaw. Policy LU51 provides for higher density housing forms through a rezoning process. Staff are satisfied the proposal meets the relevant criteria for that rezoning process as outlined in the report. With respect to the private street system, the subdivision bylaw gives guidance for the Planning Advisory Committee to approve their use. The bylaw intends private streets to be used in serviced areas within the primary development area of the city, with an emphasis on clustered townhouses. The ownership model of the proposal is conducive to private streets, and the applicant has emphasized they're interested in private ownership for providing their own winter maintenance. On this basis, the PAC granted the use of private streets with a number of variances. The conceptual layout attached in the report provides for the design of the private street systems. The street systems to be private will be built out to the general city specifications, which basically means they would be slightly narrower than a local street, maybe 8 meters in width, but still of a suitable width and surface for emergency vehicles. In terms of traffic, the proposal is well under the 190 units used to calculate potential traffic improvements, which were made in 2011 with the installation of the signalized intersection. On the topic of emergency access, staff had initially proposed a connection be provided between the subject property and Miles Drive due to the private nature of the development. There had been a previous council condition that there be no connection to Miles Drive and that all connection be oriented towards Mountain View Drive. And this emergency access was a way of making a compromise. It would have been controlled with a gate. Based on neighborhood input, the Planning Advisory Committee voted to remove this condition. And upon further discussion with St. John Fire, staff are satisfied with this amended recommendation that it wouldn't compromise public safety and that the two accesses off Coulter Street and Sonia Drive would be sufficient. There has been a lot of public engagement around this proposal, including a neighborhood meeting held by the developer. Staff attended the meeting, although did not participate. The meeting was well received, with no opposition to the proposal, but concerns were expressed around an initial idea for use of the LPP as a dog park, which has since been rejected, and for the Miles Drive emergency access connection principally. So these concerns have now been dealt with. In addition to the developer neighborhood meeting, letters were sent out to area landowners last month, in addition to advertisement on the city website. There were around 16 members of the public in attendance at the Planning Advisory Committee meeting, and all in all, staff received 11 letters from the public regarding the proposal. Staff's recommendation to the PAC was made on the basis of conformity with the municipal plan policy and provisions set out in other city bylaws. So the staff recommendation is here before you. I would say, again, that recommendation was amended by the PAC, so Part 3I was removed as a Section 59 condition. And in reviewing that, staff are supportive of that removal. So now the recommendation before you is as follows. It would be, in summary, to amend the municipal plan, rezone the property, apply conditions A through H as per the Section 59 of the Community Planning Act, and grant necessary local government services easements. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reed. That's the staff presentation, and now we'll go through the public hearing. And if you have questions, we can ask after the public hearing. So is there anyone present who wishes to speak against the municipal plan amendment and zoning amendment for 40 Mountain View Drive? Please come forward to the podium, and please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Darlene Hersey, and I live on Silverstone Street in the Miles subdivision. I'm not here against the build, actually. We went to the PAC meeting. I'm a member of the Miles Subdivision Ratepayers Association. I'm here with a few of my neighbors tonight. The rest we didn't want to put on the roads. We're not against Mr. Aka's build whatsoever. We just want a clarification that Miles Drive will not be open to through traffic or emergency vehicles. It has been removed from the build itself, and that's all we're looking for tonight is clarification that it's not going to be approved for opening.
Well, thank you very much.
And I just want to add one thing, too. Mr. Rocca and Mr. Turner from Hughes Surveys have been absolutely wonderful to deal with. There was never any opposition to the build. It was just the road opening.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. And we'll address that later tonight. Is there any questions from councilors? If you could please go back, I have a couple of questions for you. Yes, please. Councillor Sullivan.
Hi, Darlene. I know you presented a PAC, and subsequent to PAC, you're probably also familiar with a lot of the letters in opposition.
To the build, I am. I read them.
Good.
Yeah.
And knowing the neighborhood as you do, how would you say the conversation has been with the recommendations that are before us from PAC?
Well, being the quiet one in the neighborhood, I'm the one that actually delivered the letters and kind of went door to door. Even back, if I just give a little bit of history, we went through this 10 years ago with Mr. Darlin, and it was a long, dragged-out process, and Councillor Sullivan was probably the only one, I think, here at that time. And it went on for months, and, you know, there was meetings between the builder and the residents, and it was not that we ever wanted to stop the build. We just wanted to keep our roads closed. They're narrow, there's no sidewalks, there's no lighting, there's, you know, improper lighting, there's no curbing. And we know the city doesn't have the money to come in and do all that stuff. So when you open a road, you're putting in, you know, 100 to 150 more vehicles into roads that can't sustain that. So then the build never happened, and we said, well, you know, the city agreed we weren't going to open the roads, and the build never happened. So then it comes again, and it's brought to my attention by the neighbors that Mr. Rock is going to build. I said, well, here we go again. But, you know, when I got talking with Mr. Rock, and we communicated quite a bit, and he certainly has been a gentleman, he did not want the road opened, and we saw no purpose. We're a priority 4 road, and we have the best plow drivers in the city, but at the end of the day, we're priority 4. It's not a direct route for emergency vehicles, and it would make absolutely no sense for it to be opened. And then we come back to the point that, you know, we still don't have sidewalks, we don't have curbing. Our neighbors in the High Meadow Park townhouses use it for walking. There's people walk their kids, walk their dogs. There's a young fellow walks his autistic brother in a stroller. I don't have to look out my window and see them get hit because we now have 100 vehicles coming into the subdivision. When Jocelyn Road was open, we have seen a huge influx in traffic, and I'm going to get a spike belt for some of them. So when the build came in, and of course, you know, it came to our attention, it was like, what are we going to do now? So, you know, the view was never that we were opposed to the build. Nobody knew Mr. Rocca. I knew a little bit about Mr. Rocca and his builds, and you know, never heard that he wasn't a gentleman to deal with. So we went to the meeting, and I do have to applaud him for that, because the meeting was well run. You know, nobody was shouting out or being ignorant or rude, and he addressed our concerns. And if anybody's ever looking to build, you need to get Mr. Turner, because he's A1. I recommend him, highly recommend him. The concerns weren't the build as much as water. There is a water fault there, or a lot of water. And years ago, I'm not sure if everybody's aware, Century 21 tried to build in there, and the city declined because they didn't think the land would support the weight of the building. So the concern was water, and that came up at the meeting, and Mr. Rocca and Mr. Turner addressed that. And then for our neighbors on Westbrook, so there was a huge tree line there, and when Mr. Darlin wanted to build, he just came in and started cutting trees. He was supposed to put berms, they weren't replaced. So at the far end of Westbrook, it's completely open. We saw a huge influx of foot traffic. We saw a huge amount of crime that we never had before. You know, like one police officer said, like, we hardly ever answered a call in there. Then we had this spell right after that we were having, you know, vehicle break-ins and garage break-ins, and you know, then it was, you know, I'm sitting up all night with my baseball bat because now I got to be the neighborhood watch too. But so, you know, the neighborhood started to change a little bit. So the concern wasn't the build as much as what happens with the water. The tree line, the people on Westbrook want to keep their tree line for privacy, and I certainly appreciate that. And the dog park issue. But you know what? Mr. Rocca heard all that.
So if I can jump into, those were the concerns the neighborhood had coming in because from the previous build.
Correct.
Have those been satisfied with the recommendations?
They have. You know, Mr. Rocca heard you know, one thing I can say is he heard the neighbors, he listened, and he pulled back on the dog park because nobody on Westbrook wanted that. He acknowledged that, you know, the tree line, he'll keep as much of that as he can, and I think the water issue is being addressed. From what I've read, it looks like it's being addressed. The city is making sure that that's addressed properly. You know, the concern, there was a few questions on the 2 stories being built, but I don't know that that's really an issue. If you look at the building, it's absolutely beautiful. I actually support his build personally, as long as our road's not open. That's
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I don't see any. Okay, anyone else who wishes to speak against the plans, or new plans, I should say, for 40 Mountain View Drive? For the third and final time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak against the application for municipal plan and zoning application amendment for 40 Mountain View Drive? If not, is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of? If you could please state your name and address, even though we may know you.
Good evening, Your Worship, and members of council. My name is John Rocca, and I am the president of the development company 048367MB Ltd. Could I get a glass of water from someone? I'm on medication, and it's one of that type that dries you up. First of all, we accept the recommendations in this. Thank you. We accept staff's recommendation. Guess the only other comments that I really have, I'm happy to answer questions, is to point out that we're still looking at a number of issues. One of the ones which has been raised by the residents about the 6-story height. We've been at this only for about 5 months, since November, and typically you need 12 to 16 months to design it. So we've really been trying to fast track this so we could be under construction this spring. And so the plan is still fluid. And the townhouses, for example, we're going to be building a duplex which will have the same layout as the townhouses have. And we're going to try and get some public reaction to it on pricing, mix, how many of this style, how many of that style. So we may need to come back to you again with some minor modifications. There's the 6-story one. We still believe that the 6-story may be the answer, but if we're looking at the 4-story, because it has been raised as a concern by the residents in Garnet. And there is a way of doing it, but we don't know yet exactly whether it will work. So essentially what we're saying is that at the moment we're proceeding, we'd like to proceed based on this plan, but once we complete some more of the marketing, that may change the nature of the townhouses. And I met this morning with our design team, and they're looking now at the possibility of a 4-story building. How can we get enough units in it for it to work? So we try very hard to listen to the citizens and their concerns, and we want to be good neighbors because we'll be the largest homeowner in that neighborhood and the one that has the most money out invested in the property. So good neighbors is what we're looking for, and we have good neighbors, and we intend to be a good neighbor to them as well.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Rocca. And Miles Drive is not going to be open. It's not open for...
Yes, and I support the decision not to open Miles Drive.
The other thing, I don't see any lights, but I just wanted to ask you about the private streets, and I'm only asking that because we've had some issues in other private streets, and it's not like for now or next year or 5 years from now, it's for later on. Like how, if it's going to be a private street and the city is not going to plow it, I assume, or not clean it, I mean, that has to be somehow put in your deeds so that like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that they don't come back and ask the city to undertake to do the work on that street or to plow them or whatever, because if we, go along with private streets, that over time changes. People get, the people that originally are there, they are gone, and somebody else comes along, and if the city can't afford to do that or it doesn't make sense for the city to do it, the city's always in a sort of awkward situation, what happens. So how do you address that? Do you put that in the deeds of the property, and does it pass on from one ownership to another ownership, like?
I don't know how you really address it, to be honest, because when you're dealing with the apartment tenants, they're really, quite frankly, don't care if it's private, public, or however. So it's not them, it's the townhouses. And the main reason why we want to keep it as a private street network is because, as Donna said, the neighborhood is priority 4, where we're going to have between $20 and $25 million invested in this project. And the kinds of rents that we are asking for, money that we're asking for, people are not prepared to wait, a day or 2 days or 3 hours for their streets to be plowed. So if it's our street, we're going to make sure that by 6:30.
Yeah, I know, I understand that, yeah.
So I have no problem, to put anything in any of the provisions, but I don't know how that would address the issue with the apartment owners. With the others, there's no problem if we sell the townhouses, that there be a provision sort of pointing out that this is a private street and will remain a private street.
But for the apartment, I would take it would just be in deed for the ownership, so if you sold it at some point in time, that would pass on to the next owner.
I don't know. Maybe the solicitor can address that issue. I don't know legally, but I'm happy to take a look at it. I understand the concern, and I've read about it in the newspaper, and so whatever is required or we're able to do to reinforce that point that it is private street,
Okay.
We will definitely do it.
All right, thank you. I don't see any questions, so thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present who would like to speak in favor of? You just state your name and address.
Thanks, Madam Deputy. It's Steve Carson. I live at 1 Sealy Street, and I'm with Develop St. John. And as Council's familiar with, Develop St. John was established as a arm's-length organization of the city to help instigate and champion strategic real estate development opportunities to drive tax-based growth. We are in support of the staff recommendation with regards to this project. We've been working with Mr. Rocca and his team since the inception of this vision for the property, and are really encouraged and pleased to kind of see the high-quality design and finish work that's gone into the proposal. And in particular, we really believe right now we're doing some analysis of other properties along Mountain View Drive and other properties in the vicinity, but we really believe this will set a new standard, high-quality standard for residential development in the area and attract more population base to the Mountain View Drive area. So this is a significant investment, obviously, and will have a really positive impact on the tax base. So we're certainly in support of the project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carson. For the third and final time, is there anyone else present who wishes to speak in favor of 40 Mountain View Drive? So that ends our public hearing, and if council wishes to move forward, the first motion would be first reading for the municipal plan amendment.
Move first reading.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Okay. Councillor Reardon on the question.
I've got a couple of questions for staff, please.
Go ahead.
I'm curious about the subdivision bylaw. How old would that be?
To you, Councillor, through your worship, the subdivision bylaw was recently redone, and it was adopted in 2016. 2016.
I think it's a fantastic project. The reason I ask is the world isn't getting safer. It's getting more dangerous, I guess, as we go on. And when I read this project, this proposal, the one entrance and exit was sort of a flag for me. And I certainly hear and understand what the residents of the other streets say, that they don't want increased traffic for their safety. And on the other hand, I guess, I feel like I need to sacrifice the safety of that little development, because if you only have one entrance or exit and you had someone who was holding that whole street hostage, I don't know how you would get, you would get your emergency vehicles or whatever in there. So I guess I feel like no matter which way I go on this one, someone's safety is going to be compromised to a certain extent. But I do raise that as a flag. I'm certainly going to vote for the proposal as it is, but I just raise that as a flag. Now, the other thing in this is I would like to see in the recommendations in the section 59 here, it says 3E, stormwater systems remain private and developers' responsibility. I'd like to see that for the road as well. I'd like to see that added in there as number I guess, under number 3, for me to support that, because I think it's imperative that that's in black and white and that everyone understands that, because we've had that issue with Yacht Haven Lane. So I would appreciate that if that was added in there. And what's your best before date on your traffic reports? That one was from 2008. So how often would they be updated?
To the council, through your worship, there's no requirement under the bylaw, but I did conduct some analysis of the area. There was nothing new built around the area, so it still seemed valid, although you're correct to point out that 11 years have passed. But there's nothing sufficient that would add additional. It's basically just units in the area and what the peak flows are, and there's nothing that would have added additional units to that area in that time duration.
And the other thing is that the garbage issue for us is we don't pick up garbage on private roads, so I don't know what the plan would be, I guess, to mitigate that. So, so there's a few little, I guess, quirks that need to be worked out for it to fly. Like I said, I think it's a great project, but before I could support it, I would need to see that I'd like to see that the private road system remain private and developers' responsibility put into those Section 59s. So can I get that added?
Well, could we have staff talk about the garbage pickup and also on the road conditions with the storage? Is there any other information that can be given? Commissioner? Okay. Mr. Hugenholz?
No, to me, please.
Oh, sorry. City Manager?
Your worship, to the councillor, on the issue of garbage, the staff right now is undertaking I'll use the term holistic review of how we are managing garbage within the city, our waste management within the city, and we will be coming to you in the future with a number of recommendations on waste management. And this entire issue of collecting garbage on private roads where we have some inconsistencies within the city will be addressed within that plan. So we will come back to you with answers on the garbage issue. As for the Section 59, should it be the desire of council to add in that additional clause, then that could be a motion passed by council, and then we would take the necessary actions. We have no objection at staff level one way or the other. We believe our normal processes take care of that. However, there is a legal consideration with continually putting in these statements that I would pass over to the city solicitor to make a comment on.
Okay, City Solicitor, John?
Your worship, how can I put this? The comfort that council might take in having a provision like that in a Section 39 condition is really an illusory one, because in fact and in law, the arrangement that's being requested by the developer and what, if council goes ahead and approves the recommendation, would result would be an arrangement that clearly establishes private services, including some stormwater facilities. And there is never an obligation in those circumstances for a council ever to accept responsibility for either the streets or any other facilities that are privately held. And in fact, having a Section 39 condition that says that will still never prevent someone in the future from coming back to a council and saying, well, we'd like to change it. So I can understand the sort of the initial thought that having this in the Section 39 conditions provides some comfort, but in fact, and I say, and in law, it really does no more than reemphasize what is the case or would be the case if it weren't there.
Okay, if you say it's moot, I'm willing to go with your recommendation then.
And it is.
And that would be in section 59.
Yes, yeah. Like 39, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, any other questions? I don't think so. Don't see any. So what we're moving right now is the first reading of the Municipal Plan Amendment, PAC. Yeah. On the question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Common Clerk? Yes.
A law to amend the municipal plan bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Can we have a second for second reading of the Municipal Plan Amendment? On the question, all those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carried. Common Clerk?
A law to amend the municipal plan bylaw.
Okay, and we need first reading of the zoning amendment.
First reading.
On the question of first reading of zoning amendment, all those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Common Clerk?
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Then we need the second reading of zoning amendment.
Move second reading. Second.
On the question of second reading, all those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carried. Common Clerk?
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay. And then third reading would be 2 weeks from now. So thank you very much, and to Mr. Rocca, congratulations. We're certainly, thank you very much for developing in our city, and we appreciate and hope everything goes well for you. Thank you. Okay, Common Clerk, our next item.
No, unless, do you want a presentation mode?
Mine's right there, I can see.
I took you at a presentation mode.
If there's anyone in the audience that's for our next public hearing, they should come inside. It's probably better if they're inside for 175 Hilliard Street. Common Clerk?
Yes, Your Worship. 9.3 on your agenda is a proposed zoning bylaw amendment. It does have a PAC report recommending the amendment for 175 Hilliard Street. I'd also like to point out that I did distribute a document to council members today. It was a late addition from Tobias Properties on this item. It was a written submission as the person couldn't be here this evening. So that would be added on as part of your supplemental materials to the agenda packet.
Okay, and we're going to have a staff presentation. Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, Your Worship, members of council. Tonight is a public hearing to consider proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw to address self-storage facilities, as well as a Section 59 amendment that's specific to a proposal at 175 Hilliard Place. You do have in your package also an amended staff recommendation that addresses some of the concerns raised by the Planning Advisory Committee. And I wanted to introduce Mr. Mark Reed, Senior Planner with our department, to provide a brief overview of the proposal before you tonight.
Okay, Mr. Reed.
Okay, thank you. The application before you, as Jacqueline said, is a rezoning and Section 59 amendment for the property at 175 Hilliard Street. The applicant's proposal is to construct a self-storage facility both within the building at the Hilliard Street property and an external self-storage facility as well. Staff are proposing to accommodate this through a text amendment to the zoning bylaw that would allow for this use to be listed as a permitted use in the business park commercial zone. We are also proposing to respond to some of the concerns raised at the PAC meeting to have a prohibition where your CBP zone is within 60 meters of an uptown residential zone. there would effectively be a prohibition on establishing a self-storage use. One of the comments that did come up at the PAC meeting was a concern with respect to some of the areas along Lower Cove Loop where we do have some CVP zoning in fairly close proximity to the uptown core. It also requires an amendment to the Section 59 conditions on the property. And as part of a customer service initiative, customer-based focus, we also looked at a broader text amendment and are proposing that self-storage facilities be added to the general commercial zone as a permitted use. And we're also recommending some landscaping standards to mitigate impacts on adjacent residential properties. The site location is in the north end of the city. The site is about 1.84 hectares located between Main Street and Hilliard Street. The nearest residential area is about 90 meters to the north along Harbor Terrace and Moore Street. That residential area is also 20 meters higher in elevation than the subject site. The applicant has provided some preliminary site and building plans, and there's really two components to his proposal. One would be within Building D, they would have an internal self-storage area. And then here on the external area, just essentially adjacent to Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons would be over here. They would develop some external units that would allow you to pull up with a private vehicle and load and unload the storage units. This is a close-up of the site showing there's three buildings that front onto Main Street. Building D is here under this parking area, and then this gravel area here is roughly 1,300 square meters in area, and that's where the external storage units would go. Here's a view here from Hilliard Street. You can see Building D here, rather, the gray and white concrete frame with the brown bays. The applicant plans to develop that as the internal unit starting back here where there's currently some vacant space, and then depending on market demand and the other tenants, expand outward. This view here shows just to the rear of the snowbank where the external units would go, adjacent to the existing Tim Hortons. This is a view from Moore Street here, so the external units would be right here on this gravel area of the site that's currently covered with snow. The site is zoned business center in the municipal plan. That's an area that we see a lot of automobile-oriented uses, so this fits in well with that. Also uses that tend to require more floor area in a building or more site area than some of our other commercial zones in the city. The applicant is proposing to increase the landscaping along the street frontages of the site that complies with the urban design requirements of the municipal plan. It's also a service site. It's serviced by water and sewer. It's proximate to the city's roadway network, so it represents a good case of infill of an underutilized site. And as well, the external units, what we see in a lot of other jurisdictions is these tend to be an interim land use where in order for the property owner to generate some revenue over the shorter term, they'll put an external self-storage facility, and then when market conditions change, perhaps that land is more attractive for an office or a retail type of use, they'll basically build an office building or a retail building there. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal meets the intent of the policies of the municipal plan for this particular land use designation. The site is currently zoned business park commercial. That does not allow for a self-storage facility as of right, although it does provide for a warehouse. So if the applicant wanted to construct a large single-tenant warehouse, they could do that. Basically, from a traffic generation perspective, these self-storage units generate anywhere between 2 to 3 trips per hour for every 100 units on the site. So relatively low in terms of traffic generation associated with a commercial development. There's also less truck traffic than you would find with a lot of more intensive retail or warehousing uses. A lot of them are homeowners who may be downsizing and utilizing these facilities to store some of their belongings while they move houses or downsize into a smaller dwelling unit. Staff recommendation is permitted, as presented in the report to PAC, was to add the self-storage facility as a permitted use in the business park commercial and general commercial zones, as well as some additional landscaping standards that would apply where these facilities are located within 15 meters of a residential zone. We're also recommending that the Section 59 conditions that limit the use of that gravel portion of the site be rescinded to allow for the proposed external self-storage units. And we're also proposing 2 new conditions for the site. One would require the developer to provide a landscaping plan detailing the landscaping along the Main Street and Hilliard Street frontages with his building permit application. And the second would be to for the developer to provide us with an easement for some existing municipal infrastructure we have running through the site. Now, we don't have a specific timeline on acquiring the easement. We've left that open because we know there's some negotiations with the developer and the city to acquire that easement and detailed survey design. Public engagement, we went out through a website advertisement and letters to landowner adjacent to the site in mid-March. We did receive 2 letters, one expressing concerns, one expressing opposition. The applicant was in agreement with the staff recommendation at the PAC meeting. We also had an area resident who spoke at the PAC meeting in opposition. They were concerned with the view from the adjacent residential properties that were at a higher elevation. They had some concerns with the proximity of some CBP zoned areas to the uptown core, and also, you know, the potential lower employment levels that these particular types of uses generate. PAC's recommendation, they adopted a somewhat amended recommendation from that put forward in the staff report. Basically, PAC's recommendation was to have these as a conditional use in both the CBP and CG zones. So what that would mean with the PAC recommendation is any time a developer wanted to come back and build a self-storage facility either on a site that has general commercial or business park commercial zoning, they would have to appear before PAC, who would then review it and impose site-specific terms and conditions. The recommendation that we provided in the supplemental staff report is an amended staff recommendation that addresses the PAC concerns around the proximity of some of the CBP zones to the uptown through a 60-meter spacing requirement from urban center residential areas. So that would basically restrict where these could go in proximity to the uptown. As well, we note that our former zoning bylaw had quite a few conditional uses, and when we adopted the new zoning bylaw in 2015, you know, we've taken an approach that is more predictive for both residents and the development community by basically eliminating a lot of our conditional uses. Under the former zoning bylaw, there were about 250 uses in the various zones that had some form of PAC approval. So those zones would require somebody to appear before PAC. PAC would then impose terms and conditions. Under the new bylaw, we've basically gone to a more permissive approach based on a lot of the feedback that we've had, you know, through those years of applications and our consultation with the community on the zoning bylaw in terms of, you know, what appropriate community standards are with respect to landscaping and site design. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Reed, and now we'll go to the public hearing. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak against this application at 175 Hilliard Place, or Street, I should say? For the second time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak against this application at 175 Hilliard Street? For the third and final time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak against the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 175 Hilliard Place? If not, is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of the zoning bylaw amendment for 175 Hilliard Place? Please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rod Adams, and I live at 22 Cove Crescent, Rossi, New Brunswick. I am here this evening, Your Worship, and councillors and city staff, basically to state that we're in total support of the staff report for 175 Hilliard Place.
Okay, you fine? Any questions from council? If not, thank you very much for a presentation.
You're welcome.
For the second time, is there anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 175 Hilliard Place Street?
Yes,
Please
thank
state
you,
your name and address again.
Madam Deputy, it's Steve Carson from 1 Sealy Street. I'm with Develop St. John. We're just here in support of staff recommendation and the project. In particular, we think it's really important that the focus on clear, consistent, and predictable process that staff is recommending for the investment and the developer community is a really important point of the tonight's recommendation. And as you know, there's been a lot of effort to reduce red tape, and this is another, I think, really positive step in that matter to encourage investment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Carson. I don't see any questions. Anyone else for third and final time? Anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the proposed zoning bylaw for 175 Hilliard Street? If not, the public hearing, Councillor, well, your question to staff. So the public hearing is ended. Could I have somebody move the first reading, please?
I think it's staff's amended.
It'd be staff's amendment on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment.
I'll move that.
Staff's amendment. Moved and seconded on that question, Councillor Reardon.
Can I ask staff, I know in this zoning, business park, commercial, that you could have a warehouse. So what would be the difference between a warehouse and these storage units?
The main difference would be the storage units have a smaller internal footprint, so basically they're a small, they could be a 5x5 area, some of them are 5x10, there's varying sizes, so you basically have a roll-up door that you access, so it's like an individual storage locker that's roughly, you know, it could be anywhere from 5x5 feet to 5x20 feet. So it's essentially warehouse space that's compartmentalized and rented to an individual tenant as opposed to a larger warehouse that you'd see perhaps in an industrial park or like a single tenant warehouse for, say, Irving Paper or something along those lines.
I guess I was just curious as to why in that zoning you could have a warehouse but you couldn't have the self-storage units. You know, what would, and I don't, and they're going to be added though.
Yes.
Going into
they
the
would
future.
be added.
So is there a time frame, or is that important or not, of when, like, I guess you could use those 24/7?
Typically, they are accessed 24/7. There's a controlled keypad access. We've looked at the traffic generation for these, and you know, typically they conform pretty closely to an AM and PM peak. There'd be perhaps some traffic on a Saturday, but, you know, much like a retail operation, so.
So in a business park commercial, would there be hours of operation? There wouldn't be, would there?
No, the only land use that we have in the zoning bylaw that we regulate hours of operation for would be a pit or a quarry.
Okay. And I just want to say thanks to Morgan Lanigan. He sent us 9 pages of questions, and a lot of them were very philosophical in the application of storage bins, et cetera. So it was some food for thought, but in this zoning, I don't see how I could vote against it, I think, considering that it's basically a warehouse with doors on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sullivan.
Just to thank you for staff, Deputy, sitting on PAC and being through the discussion with Mr. Lanigan and who brought the concerns forward. I think staff did a very good job of listening to the concerns of PAC, and even though PAC made one recommendation after discussion with staff, I think they did a very good job of interpreting it and coming back with something even better. So the process is working, and just thanks to staff for that work.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor McKenzie.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, Mark, I like the idea that this is something that doesn't have to be permanent. We're making good use of that lot now with the idea that down the road, if Main Street gets expanded or something, it can be changed into something else. So I'll be supporting it, and thanks for all your hard work.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. So we have first reading on the floor for a vote on the first reading of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment by staff for 175 Hilliard Street. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Second reading.
Okay, on the second reading for proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 175 Hilliard Street, staff's amendment, on those, all those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk.
A law to amend the zoning bylaw of the City of St. John.
Okay, thank you. So our next item, Common Clerk?
Next item on the agenda is 11.1, and it's amendment to parking bylaw, submission from Councilors Reardon and Councilor McKenzie.
You want to put your light on? Who's going to speak? Councilor McKenzie?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll read the motion first and then give you some background on it. Refer to the city manager to amend the parking bylaw to allow the parking commissioners and the city police powers to ticket and or tow commercial vehicles that are parked on city streets for extended amounts of time.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, and you want to read your background, or?
Yeah, originally when we brought this forward, we were looking at just large commercial vehicles because they seem to be utilizing urban streets as a warehouse sometimes. So in a discussion this afternoon with staff, we realized that they may be looking at a wider, broader scope for parking in St. John, and we'd like to make this part of that. So it would be referred to the city manager under that type of an umbrella of a larger part of what they're looking at now in terms of parking in St. John.
So it will end up as a referral motion to the city manager?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Reardon?
Well, what I was going to say.
Just a minute now.
We want to refer it to the city manager to have a look at it, but we want to let everyone know that it wouldn't supersede any of the priorities that we have already set right now. So it would come at the end of the priorities and what they're working on now. So this is to look at this, but not immediately, not to come back any quicker, but just to come back to have a look at this whole parking issue for the whole city. I've been chasing a couple of these things myself for the last couple of years, so there's been some issues with it. So after talking to the city manager this afternoon, a more holistic approach that's time sensitive as far as the other priorities are concerned that we've already established, that they're already working on. We're prepared to wait for that to come. So if that's good with you, city manager, if you want to change anything, add anything, we're happy to do that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. City manager, got your light on. Would that also include cars and for the entire city? Like if a car was on a street for 2 weeks at a time, or any size truck? Oh, sorry, I thought I pressed it on here. There you go.
Your worship and members of council, we view this problem as being much more than a singular truck somewhere or trucks in general or cars in general. I think there is quite a bit of work that can be done and a lot of consultation that would need to occur on all of our traffic management parking bylaw rules within the city of St. John. It would be a significant undertaking. It's not in the work plan for 2019 as the work plan currently sits. We may be able to get to it near the end of 2019, but certainly it would be our intent to explore this in early 2020 and come back to council with a holistic review of the parking bylaws and recommendations. So to answer your question specifically, would it include cars or not? I don't know today, but it would be part of our consideration.
Okay, so it's a referral motion to the city manager. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carried. Next item, Common Clerk.
Your Worship, what was added to the agenda is 16.1, Continuous Improvement Initiatives Update is recommended next.
Okay, the city manager up front first is going to speak on this issue.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council.
Oh, just a minute. Please put your light on again. Thank you.
Your Worship, members of council, you will recall that so far this year you have been briefed on a number of what I would categorize as large-scale continuous improvement initiatives that we will undertake within the work plan of 2019. Such things as a fundamental review of our internal structure, a fleet optimization, to name but two of them. In addition to that, at the last council meeting, we explained to you, we briefed you on a number of smaller scale initiatives associated with development, growth and development. Some of the feedback we got from that briefing was that it was excellent and gave you a certain awareness of some of the improvements or improvement initiatives that we are undertaking within the city staff. So that you are aware, there has been a challenge launched by the city manager to all the staff, and once every quarter, every department must come up with 2 new ideas, 2 initiatives. They can be very small, or they can be medium-sized so long as they don't impact the overall work priorities. One idea must be on how to improve customer service within their organization, and one idea must be how they will contribute to facilitating growth and development. We have gone through that exercise for Q1, and we are in the process of reviewing all of those ideas. What we intend to do moving forward is on a regular recurring basis, have a standing agenda item whereby you would be exposed, just for your information, at some of these staff ideas for continuous improvement, either in customer service or to facilitate growth at the council meetings. Today, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Rackley-Roach, who is our head of our continuous improvement organization, and she will set the stage for the few initiatives that you will be briefed on again this evening. And again, I'd like to stress, some of these may be underwhelming because they're quite small, but it gives you a flavor of the sorts of things we are looking at.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Common Council. As the city manager mentioned, the challenge was put out to all the service areas to come up with one idea in growth and one idea that would improve customer service. I'm very happy tonight to have 3 members of our staff here from 3 different areas to present just 3 of the ideas of, I think we had about 8 that were shared with the senior leadership team on Monday of last week. The growth and customer service initiatives being undertaken by the Continuous Improvement Information Technology and GIS team, so that's 3 teams together, will be presented respectively by Yves Legier, our GIS manager, and that idea is Development Incentives Program Mobile Application, and Evelyn Hatfield, she's the Continuous Improvement Manager, and she will be presenting on a continuous improvement video series. And Senior Firefighter Mark Carey with the St. John Fire Service will be presenting an interested initiative that will improve interactions with our customers in relation to autism awareness training. So I'm going to pass it over to Yves to start the updates.
Okay, thank you very much.
Approximately 60% of visitors right now to the city's website access it using a mobile device, and this percentage is increasing. So the GIS team is in the process of converting the Development Incentives Program app to a mobile compatible version that can easily be accessed through the city's website. The conversion of the app will allow developers and realtors to access Development Incentive Program information on site when they're looking at a particular property. In addition to learning about different incentive programs available for a property, users will also be able to access property assessment information and as well as surrounding property information to support their decision making. Development of the app will be completed with internal resources and will be ready to go when the updated Development Incentives Program is launched this spring, pending Common Council's approval. Timing the promotion of the new mobile app with with the relaunch of the Development Incentives Program will create excitement for investors. Staff has received positive feedback on other growth-related applications such as Watch Us Grow. The GIS team is happy to add
the information-rich tools and resources developers and citizens can access to support growth in our community.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. The Continuous Improvement Team is creating a series of videos that will act as self-help resource materials to support service areas and their employees in making small changes every day that will improve customer service to the public and our internal customers. With the help of human resources, the videos will be made accessible to all employees with tools to track use and measure the understanding of concepts covered as appropriate. The first video, Improving Customer Service Through Continuous Improvement, will be available to employees in the second quarter of 2019. In addition to the videos, employees will be able to submit improvement ideas and receive support to action them. Working with the information technology team, the city's intranet site on SharePoint will be updated to provide better access to continuous improvement resources and include a new portal to submit ideas for things they think can be improved. The CI team will review all ideas submitted with respective service areas to determine how to action them and engage employees throughout the process. Employees will also be given the tools to work directly with their managers or teams to make improvements. The updated continuous improvement site will be available in the second quarter of 2019. Continuous improvement must be embraced by all employees to ensure the cost-effective delivery of public service. The intent of the video series and the continuous improvement portal is to further embed a continuous improvement way of thinking throughout the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Your Worship, Council, staff. Thank you. Again, my name is Mark Carey. I'm in my 31st year of service with St. John Fire.
Congratulations.
And I'm also a Vice President of Local 771, the St. John Firefighters, of the International Association of Firefighters. Every single day, people in St. John dial 911 and request assistance. Often the first responding agency to these St. Johners in crisis is the St. John Fire Department. Often our customers have unique and special needs that require a unique and special response. In our constant desire to serve this diverse and wonderful community, we're pleased to announce that beginning in June, all members of the St. John Fire Department will have the opportunity to be trained in the skill of autism awareness for first responders. In cooperation with the Anglophone School District South and their autism leads and specialists, a curriculum has been adopted to train our members in this field. As an overview, St. John Fire Department personnel will attend a training session hosted by an Anglophone School District South lead. This session will consist of 3 components, followed by a 30-minute Q&A discussion forum with that lead. Component 1, This is Autism, introduces us to 6 adults and children with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, who tell us how it affects their lives and what they'd like people to know. Component 2, Autism, Strategies for First Responders, focuses on the tools required to engage with people on the spectrum, as their behaviors are often misunderstood or misinterpreted. These tools include recognizing behavior, sensory needs, communication strategies, and de-escalating a situation. Component 3, Autism Roundtable, is a discussion between a parent of an autistic child, an autistic adult, a police officer, and a firefighter. Through this discussion, we learn that behavior, not appearance, is the indicator that one may be on the autistic spectrum. Your St. John firefighters are excited to add to their skill set to help those in our community who may require the unique and special response discussed earlier. Given the fact that recent data tells us that 1 in 68 children will be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, these skills will assist the St. John Fire Department in providing timely and appropriate service to all members of our community. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there happen to be any.
I don't think at the moment, anyway, but I want to say thank you very much, and thank you to all the presenters. We certainly look forward to all 3 initiatives coming to do, going forward and happening in our city. So thank you, and all the best to Continuous Improvement Department and keeping us up to date. So if I could have a motion from council to receive and file. On that question, all those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk.
Your Worship, item 12.1 on your agenda is a staff report with respect to population growth estimates.
Okay, and that's kind of like 12.2. So, Ms. Hamilton, you're going to lead us off on that?
Your Worship, members of council, tonight, building on the theme of positive news, we want to take this opportunity to share with council some recent trending in the city's population growth. I'd like to introduce David Doppelstein, the city's manager of population growth. David is going to provide some brief highlights on the recent release by Statistics Canada of population growth estimates for St. John.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and councillors. So, as you've heard, the presentation tonight I'm offering is good news for the city. It's good news for residents, good news for developers, good news for everybody. Statistics Canada releases population estimates annually in July. And the defined numbers don't come until every census period. So the last census was 2016, the one before was 2011. Our next one is 2021. So between those census years, we have estimates. So Statistics Canada estimated that the city's population has increased for the third year in a row, and it's now sitting at 130,000 people and change. That's for the greater St. John area. Statistics Canada doesn't release population estimates at a municipal level. So they only release it at a regional level or at a county level. So what we've done is we've modeled estimates based on their own data for the CMA. We're fortunate to be in a position that St. John County is fully within the CMA, and the city represents just over 91% of the county. And we also have our own internal models which we can use to verify based on the amount of St. John Wire users, St. John Energy subscribers. So we're fairly confident at this point that the city's population is also growing in step, and actually we believe growing faster than the outlying communities. In the past year, we believe the city's grown by 432 people. And that represents an increase of 1,233 since the census. So there's a lot of significance to this. Again, as I remind you, this data is a little data. It's 10 months old because this is official data. But there are financial implications immediately for the city. So one of which is this represents around 500 new families to the city with all the demand that they require both for housing and for goods and services. Modeling for data indicates if our new residents follow the same patterns as other Atlantic Canadians, that they'll spend about $34 million annually in household spending locally, 12 million of which I believe goes towards income taxes. The 1,200 new people has a significant impact on our gas taxes, though not until 2023. So just this change in 1,200 people would represent an additional $88,000 a year the city would be able to use for gas tax revenue. It's too hard to forecast how this will impact the unconditional grant. As you're all aware, we lost $3 million annually at the last unconditional grant because we lost just less than 2,500 people. So the challenge is we have to be growing faster in order to outpace that. In terms of how the trend line is, you can see the black line was the direction that we were going from 2011. And we had forecasted, we weren't assuming it was going to continue shrinking, but if it followed that trend, it would have continued downwards. When Council approved the population growth framework in early spring or late winter of last year in 2018, that was the orange line of what we were forecasting was our target. And so this new data showing that currently we're above the target, and so this is good for the city. We're exceeding where we want to be. At the same time, this is still a long road ahead. We've been declining for 40 years, but we're now starting to really move in the right direction. So you can see on the slides, there's a number of components of population change. And you can see, if you look at the horizontal slides at the bottom of the screen, so that was the average of the last census period from 2011 to 2016. I'm having a bit of a hard time reading this, but you can see that we were losing about 743 people on average to other parts of Canada. So that was the net loss to other parts of Canada. We still had strong immigration. We still had more people being born than dying. But if you look at the slides on the top now, you've seen significant improvement both in interprovincial migration. So the data is clearly suggesting that people are not leaving to the same degree that they were. And more importantly is we're increasing the amount of people who are moving here through immigration. And as well, we're attracting folks from other parts of the province. So people from other parts of New Brunswick are now moving to St. John more than the other way around. and we also had an increase in international students and temporary foreign workers. So some of the things to bear in mind through this, 91% of our current growth is through immigration. So council has stated that we want to be the most welcoming community in Atlantic Canada. I think it's important that we see there's some early low-hanging fruit from this, but that we need to continue on this trend. The city does have a major role to play in ensuring that our residents stay here. And it's not just about finding work, it's also ensuring a safe community, a vibrant community. If it was just about jobs, then everyone who had a job would live in the city, but we know that's not the case. And we're working on the value proposition to increase our population through a number of ways. But immigrants want great neighborhoods, welcoming communities, good services, really safe and good schools, all the things that our Canadian-born residents also want. What's interesting about immigrants, though, as you can see in the top slides, we are losing more people to death than being born, but one of the positive side effects of more immigration is immigrant women tend to have children at 3 times the rate of Canadian-born women. So in time, we expect that trend to start to move towards the positive, though we still do have a quickly aging community. Interprovincial migration, as I mentioned, we're starting to see more and more people move home from out west. In the last census period, we were seeing an average of 500 people net loss just to Alberta. And now it's moving the other direction. There's over 100 net increase to St. John just from Alberta alone. But I would put the caveat that our growth is modest. So other cities, even Moncton and Fredericton, for example, are doing quite well in all aspects of growth. The difference for us is that we were the only shrinking CMA in Canada in the last census. So this is a significant rebound. At our lowest point, we were losing 0.5% a year, and now the CMA is up to plus 0.4%. So it's almost a full percentage point increase in growth. So there's some real opportunity. We have some early wins here. Now it's about how do we keep these people here? How do we foster St. John as being more welcoming and inclusive? And so the data is suggesting at this point that we no longer have the claim to fame as being the only shrinking CMA in Canada, that with the evidence that it's sustained now, that St. John is growing, and we want to continue to do so. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Doppelstein. You're full of good news tonight. We got 432 people here since 2017, so that's great news. We do have a question from Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Deputy. I'm just wondering if you have any idea where the new citizens, when they're coming in, where they tend to be settling.
So we actually do have a lot of data on where immigrants tend to live, and we'd be happy to share the mapping with you. We're working on a map with our GIS team, but predominantly immigrants tend to live in Milledgeville. So Milledgeville, actually 25% of the population of Milledgeville does not speak French or English as a first language. So immigrants tend to live all throughout the city, but predominantly they live in Milledgeville.
It's interesting. Now, I don't want to rain on your parade, but women immigrants, depending on where they've come from, may not have had historically the access to birth control that Canadian women have. So don't count those chickens yet. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's good news. And I have to share this little story. There was a couple today from Belfast, Maine, and they've been coming to St. John for the last 20-some years on their vacation, and they love St. John, and they come here every year. So maybe we could convince them to move here, that would add a couple more. We need those types of people that want to come to our city and love to be here. So thank you very much for your report, and if I could have a receive and file motion for council. On that question, all those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carried. Common Clerk.
Your Worship, 12.5 on your agenda is a staff report and a presentation road repair update, and this would be with Commissioner Hugenholtz.
Can you just put, or you're coming up?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. This evening on Council's agenda, there were a number of reports relating to our overall construction plans for this season, as well as specific information about some of the work that's going to be happening on city roads this year. My intent is to walk through those very briefly and allow for some time for questions and answers. So really what our roadway maintenance service, we're trying to provide motorists and cyclists with safe, functional roads and maintaining accessibility of those roads throughout all seasons. There are 7 main elements, including pothole patching, area patching, utility cut reinstatement, crack sealing, asphalt resurfacing, our overlay program, and street reconstruction. I'm just going to mainly focus on the 3 at the bottom. I think a few council sessions ago we had a good discussion about pothole patching, so I'm going to focus on the latter ones. So in terms of the overall team, just so folks understand who sort of looks after what, there's a significant annual investment into roadway maintenance in any given year. So some of those activities are undertaken by city forces, and some are undertaken by contracted resources through our capital program under the direction of our engineering team. And here's just a quick snapshot of sort of what falls under what category. Excuse me. Attached to one of the reports on your kit this evening was a full list of the 34 street sections proposed for resurfacing in 2019. So these resurfacing sections are typically targeted for streets within a PCI range, pavement condition index range of 55 to 65. So the contract for this was awarded earlier this evening. Before you is the list of street sections. It represents approximately 45.6 lane kilometers. The contract value is just shy of $5.9 million, including HST. I would point out that that is less than the budget. It's less than the engineer's estimate as well. So we have a surplus on this project of just under $1.2 million, as Councillor Armstrong pointed out. So great news for the citizens of St. John and the taxpayers. Obviously, roads are one of the main priorities of council. So the funds allotted in the general fund operating budget and capital budgets combined, we want to make sure we're getting we're using all those. So staff are in the process of reviewing our street inventory for additional lists, and we will be coming back to council at a later date with a list of proposed additional streets which we want to undertake in this resurfacing program this year. Our forces also take on an asphalt overlay program each year. Those are typically targeted at streets with a pavement condition index of less than 55. So essentially those are streets within the reconstruct category, so they require very costly reconstruction. And with our limited resources, our limited budget annually for that type of work, we have an asphalt overlay program which essentially is intended to act as a temporary solution. We're planning to tackle approximately 16 lane kilometers of street this year, and that would differ from the resurfacing program in that we don't mill the existing street surface. We essentially just add a layer of asphalt pavement on top of existing. We make adjustments to our catch basins and manhole structures accordingly. So we are going to undertake this program starting in mid-June, and again I would remind council that that's a temporary solution. One of the reports that you considered earlier this evening does talk about other street construction that's occurring this year. In various areas of the city, we have Some work undertaken by city forces, contracted forces, private developers as well as other levels of government that will impact the roads, that will have an impact on citizens as they drive around. So I just want to highlight, I guess, just a few of those. We have listed on there a number of street sections that are being fully reconstructed, including Metcalf, Mecklenburg, Chipman Hill, Wentworth, and Queen Square North. Typically, those reconstruction projects, again, are undertaken for street sections that have a pavement condition index of less than 55. Many of those, if not all, on the list this year are being driven by the condition of the underground infrastructure, be that sanitary sewer or the water lines. There remains some work under the Safe Clean Drinking Water Project, particularly at John T. McMillan. In addition, we do host a coordination meeting each year with members of NBDTI, Gateway Operations, various major utility operations within the city, so like St. John Energy and the gas pipelines, just to make sure we have a good comprehensive list of what's going to be happening throughout the city, so we can coordinate those projects as in a way to minimize the disruption on our staff. So I list some of the more major ones, particularly that are planned by the DTI or Gateway Operations. So some major overpasses in the city that will be undergoing some reconstruction or other work that will have an impact on motorists in the city. So with this number of construction projects throughout the city, it's very important for us to communicate that picture to citizens. So we undertake a number of different steps for that. For major projects, we have public information sessions for, typically those are more neighborhood based. If you live in that area or if you're near there, we offer a public information session to inform citizens about the work that's planned, the anticipated timeline, the impact that's going to have on citizens, any phasing required, etc. We actually have, for example, a session scheduled for the work on Wentworth Street this Thursday at the Boys and Girls Club. We have a number of other means as well for pushing out the message. On the city's website, we have an updated construction map, which you see a sample of in the corner. That typically will include all the city projects, whether they be street reconstructions or resurfacing, in a graphical format, so you can sort of see where you live and the roads that you used on your daily commute, what those impacts are going to be. We also update on a weekly basis a weekly construction update, and that includes information such as project location, the anticipated schedule, any traffic impacts, lane closures, etc. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you very much for the report. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Deputy. Mike, I guess I'm looking at the other end of this for preventative measures, for one thing. And historically, I guess, a lot of the departments have worked in silos. So if a street is going to be scheduled for repairs or rebuild or whatever, it would probably, and maybe you do this now, be wise to know from the planning department if anyone is planning on tearing that street up next year. And so, and I asked because the year that the late fall when they did King Street, then Keith had a permit in for Historica to dig it up, and so he cut up King Street in 17 in the spring. So once, as you know, once you interrupt the integrity of the bed, then you've got trouble until you rebuild the thing again. You know, you're always patching or doing whatever. So I'd like to see some cross communication there. And I'm curious about, now, if I go to this open house about Wentworth Street, and it's just from Union up to King Street East, I use that street almost every day. And there's a lot of people cross that street there because the Irving Building, JDI, is right there. So there's a lot of parkers, I guess, that come back and forth. So it needs probably a wider and well-painted, defined crosswalk just for motorists to be alerted to that. So is that something I can bring up at this information session? Or are they just going to say, buzz off, Reardon, we don't have the money for more paint and you're getting a skinny crosswalk?
They would never say that, I'm sure. But that is exactly the intent is, what are some local factors that we need to be aware of, and we can incorporate things where it makes sense into the design and reconstruction. So that's absolutely why that would happen. And just to your question about, communication across silos, that does happen every year as we start to fine-tune our capital program, as we start to fine-tune our street reconstruction lists or resurfacing lists. We do engage with Commissioner Hamilton's department, and we certainly try and capture any work that's going to impact that street, because the last thing we want to do is see a brand new paved street get dug up. I would say that that's not always 100% possible. There are times when somebody comes along after the fact and it's a new project, we weren't aware of it, they may not even have been aware of it at the time, but we do certainly try and coordinate wherever possible.
And I'll just ask you briefly about Metcalf, because that street's been bad probably since I've lived here. And so is there anything different planned for that, or do you know? Like, I don't know if it requires, like I say, a concrete slab at the bottom or something. The drainage with the water, I don't know, I feel like that street needs to be investigated to figure out what the issues are on it, but it's always, every spring, terrible there.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, to the councillor. No, you're quite correct. There's a couple site-specific things that we're very cognizant of on that section. There is an issue with water runoff on that lower section of Metcalf. That's probably contributing to some of the deterioration that you see there. And then there's an issue a little further up as well with a rock face that tends to lose some rocks from time to time. So trying to address both of those issues is part of our plans.
That's great, because that's also the uptown, or whatever they call it, campus bike lane.
Yep.
So it'd be nice to have that organized as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Armstrong. Oh.
I don't need a microphone anyway.
No, he just said,
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the report. I just have one question, and I guess it relates to the last council meeting. Are you open, because there's such deterioration, and obviously there's a problem with the 1.5 inches, I think we compacted down to, and when you redo Metcalf, for example, as Councillor Reardon said at the bottom, could we do an experiment? Are you open up to experimenting, maybe laying 3 inches compacted or something? And I'm not an engineer, and you are, and just over a year or so, and if we don't have any problems, maybe that would be the issue, that it's so thin, and I guess the Harbor Bridge is probably the best example of what not to do in the pavement. Because the Harbor Bridge, they spent $10 million above. Let me tell you, it's worse than when they started. But that's just my question, if you'd be open to trying experimental 3 inches or 2.5 or whatever, compacted.
Yeah, I guess that's a more difficult approach when we're only doing a shave and pave, because we have a limited amount of thickness to work with. Yep. We have to be cognizant of structure elevations, drainage, driveways. We do have more flexibility when it comes to full street reconstructions, and I know you and I have had the conversation about that. We do, our spec depends on the nature and use of the street, and it would include, a fairly thick base layer and an asphalt seal layer as well. So the combined compacted asphalt thickness on a street like Metcalf, for example, could be like 4.5 inches in total. There is always the possibility to increase that in an attempt to get more life out of your asphalt pavements. That does add more cost to that project, and there's an opportunity cost there. Like, that could be one way to invest those funds. There could be another way by just doing more street resurfacing on other areas. And I guess I've asked our staff to sort of look at those numbers a little bit more so we know what exactly would the cost be, what are the pros and cons, is that the best investment of the city's limited resources. So we're going to be looking at that in a little bit more detail. I can't say it's necessarily going to be a positive recommendation. Our specifications, our general specifications are set up with different thicknesses of asphalt for different types of roadways. And that's generally based on best practice in other municipalities across the country. So there's some thought given to that, but the whole question about whether we could do an experiment, we certainly could. We're going to look at the numbers a little bit further.
All right, that's all I'm asking for, just out of the box thinking, because we got an extra $1 million, and I agree with you, let's lay it down on the roads. But maybe take a little section, whatever it costs, just for an experiment. And you're redoing the whole Metcalf, right? Taking it right down?
Correct.
And then it wouldn't concern the elevations, that you could work with them, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the report, and it's good that we're doing a lot of road work this year. I'm sure the citizens appreciate it. I have a question that for some of the residential streets, like some of the streets in the city have, in the past, they've have a sidewalk on both sides. And then when we redo it, we build it and put the sidewalk back on both sides. And see, I think in many cases, not all cases, we should look at that, because I think a sidewalk on one side is great, it's fine, it's adequate. But to take the money and put a sidewalk on both sides, in many cases, I don't think that's necessary. You may disagree, but do we look at that at all, or we just do the street as it has been previously? Because in all our residential areas, it's not every street, but many of them have a sidewalk on both sides. And people don't use it enough to warrant that, as far as I'm concerned, that if there's a sidewalk on one side, that's adequate. Do we look at it when we redo a street? Do we take that in consideration, or do we just redo it the way it is? I'm just asking.
No, through you, Worship, it's a good question. We do look at it. I can think of a couple examples over the last couple years where, particularly in smaller local streets, cul-de-sacs, where there was an existing sidewalk, that we did not reinstate that sidewalk. But a lot of times, for example, some of the more urban areas, it makes sense to have the sidewalk on both sides. And there are times, if we're just doing a street reconstruction, for example, we may not be touching the sidewalk anyway, so we would keep what is existing. But we do look at that. We're cognizant that we have a large infrastructure of sidewalks, and there are some maintenance obligations that come with that. And where it makes sense to right-size that, we're certainly open to that.
Because I like to see that always looked at, because I can name you a number of streets. I'm not going to do that, but, where we have a sidewalk on both sides, and I don't think we have that many people walking that they can't use the one sidewalk. So it would just save us money. You can make the street a bit wider, So it's just something I'd like to see happen in the future when you're looking at redoing streets. But thank you very much for the report. I have no further questions, so if I can have a receive and file motion. On that question, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried. I will go to the next item. Common Clerk.
Your Worship, item 12.3 on your agenda is a staff report and presentation fleet update. And the commissioner, in this case, I believe it's Kathy Graham today,
Okay.
Comptroller.
So you're making the presentation, Kathy?
She's introducing.
I'm just introducing.
Can you put your light on? I see Kevin Fudge.
Oh,
okay.
There I am. Thank you, Your Worship, and
members of council. I'm just here to introduce Ian Fogan, the Deputy Commissioner of Finance and Administration Services, and and Kevin Lockery, the Operation Manager for Fleet. They are here tonight to review what's been accomplished to date with Fleet and what's yet to come and the progress they've been making. I think Ian, when he first took on this current role that he's in as the Deputy Commissioner, spent a lot of time and effort in the improvements in the operations of the fleet. In this role and the significant progress he's made, Kevin Lockery has now taken on that torch, and he's continued to move that operations forward and move the Mercury recommendation and improvements to the maintenance operations of Fleet. So they'll continue to make improvements and advancements with fewer vehicles and ways to further reduce costs in this operational area. And Kevin's going to introduce and go through that information for you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ms. Graham. We'll put the podium on here. Here you go.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Common Council. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide a high-profile update concerning fleet services, review the status of current projects, and seek continued support for upcoming initiatives. Fleet Services provides a number of services to our internal customers. Some of these include acquisition, disposal, and funding services, which provide all the requirements for acquiring fleet equipment, from the creation of the specs to the inspection of the equipment on arrival. Fleet Services also calculates and verifies the optimal replacement point for all vehicles and equipment, and identifies which units to resell and directs units to the appropriate disposal networks. Maintenance Services, which provides preventative and corrective maintenance as well as manufacturing and fabrication requirements. Fleet Services performs maintenance and repair services at 4 maintenance facilities, 1 body shop, and 1 welding shop. Fuel maintenance services, which includes providing various types of fuel to internal customers via the administration of Fuel Genie, a fuel chargeback system based on consumption. Customers have access to fuel on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week at Irving fueling stations. We also provide licensing and inspection services, which includes licensing and motor vehicle inspection services for all city vehicles, ensuring their roadworthiness and conformance with provincial laws. Vehicle pooling, temporary and rental services, which provides access to various vehicles to ensure staff requirements are met while attempting to reduce costs against various service area needs. Fleet Services supports a total of 1,056 pieces of equipment. Of those 1,056 pieces of equipment, 304 are considered licensed rolling stock. The following chart provides an overview of the fleet by class code. These units break down into the following categories: general sedans, which is cars; heavy equipment, which would be loaders, excavators, backhoes, things like that; heavy trucks, which would be tandems, 6 yards, garbage trucks; light equipment, which would be forklifts and ATVs, things of that nature; light trucks, which are 1.5 ton trucks and under; St. John Fire Department heavy trucks, which would be pumpers, ladders, tankers, things of that nature; St. John Fire Department light trucks, which would be 1.5 ton trucks and under; sedans, which would be their cars; St. John Police Force patrol light-duty trucks. I say trucks there, but in most cases it's vans for them, so they're patrol vans and things like that; and St. John Police Force patrol sedans, which would be their police cars. The remaining 752 pieces of small equipment make up attachments for licensed rolling stock, including plows, wings, salters, blowers, could be trailers, backup pumps, generators, snow blowers, lawnmowers, trimmers, chainsaws, leaf blowers, that type of thing. The distribution of the 304 rolling stock is predominantly divided among 5 service areas: 128 units for transportation and environment services, 57 units for police, 52 units for St. John Water, 29 units for fire, 25 units for fleet services, of which 21 of those are the fleet pool. Please note that these totals include seasonal use equipment, so that would be our trackless machines, sidewalk machines, sweepers, ice machines, line painting trucks, for example, which are only utilized for specific tasks at certain points of the year. According to our Mercury report, our composition is typical for a municipal operation, and their conclusion was the city of our size, they determined that we were right size with a limited small list that we had to dispose, which we've done so. However, in spite of this, we continue to push for continuous improvement and ways to reduce and optimize our fleet. One example of that would be our pooling. Common Council was previously briefed on the Mercury report and the outcomes. Fleet Service is currently working on the final 3 outstanding items. Common Council was also previously approved a new fleet policy in January of 2017, and it focused on 6 key areas, which you can see on the screen now. Our new fleet management software, ClearRisk, allows Fleet Services to utilize direct billing approach for our fleet costs. Staff time is now charged towards a work order against a vehicle or a piece of equipment. Previously, service areas were charged a flat monthly fee for all vehicle maintenance regardless of the actual cost, and this form of budgeting had led to a deficit in fleet of operations of approximately $1.5 million, not properly distributed to the service areas. Staff time is now charged towards the work order against the vehicle or the piece of equipment. Direct billing provides an accurate cost for the wear and tear on our vehicles and equipment. It is likely that the previous model created cross-subsidization amongst departments and also created less accountability. This new direct billing, as recommended in the Mercury report, has ensured a true and more equitable cost of service to the various service areas, a truer form of service-based costing. Fleet Services continues to look for quantifiable measures to evaluate the success of our service area and our objectives. Listed are some of the indicators we're moving towards capturing. Utilization 1.0 is an initial CI project for Fleet Services with a scope focused on light vehicles 1.5 ton and under. The impact of Phase 1 was a perpetual annual total savings of over $155,000 annually with 11 cars sent to auction. Users went from approximately 60 users to 159 users on the system with 24 access at two locations. Phase 2 was a high-level review which resulted in the reduction of an additional 4 vehicles from the Rossay Avenue pool. Phase 3, scheduled for the fall of 2019, will involve an additional review of the pool for reductions. Fleet is also currently calculating a reduction in personal mileage and also a reduction in rentals to add to these savings. Utilization 2.0 will focus on grouping which were not part of the outcome of Utilization 1.0. These include light trucks classified as either equipment or toolboxes. Equipment are vehicles that transport equipment to and from the work sites or job sites, and toolboxes are vehicles that are considered equipment used at the job site, for example, a flusher truck, a tree chipper, or a welding vehicle. The goal would be to determine if there are opportunities for reductions and or sharing of these vehicles. Utilization 3.0 will focus on heavy equipment and trucks, which were not included in the scope of 1.0. The goal is to review and assess the city's heavy equipment and truck utilization requirements and processes to determine and target opportunities for elimination, consolidation, and pooling of heavy equipment and trucks based on comparable industry utilization rates. We are also currently looking at opportunities to increase the versatility, reduce the size, and implement new technologies. The 2 pictures below on the screen are examples of these two technologies that you guys have recently approved. Fleet Services is also approaching the final stages of our AVL installations. These instruments allow access to real-time data, odometer, real-time tracking, our locations, engine diagnostics if there's any faults taking place, trip and drive time reports, accident notification reports, seatbelt notification reports, idling notifications, speeding notifications, and fleet and route optimizations. The aim of this SOP operating procedure for idling is to reduce air pollution from vehicle and motorized equipment exhaust, promote energy conservation, reduce noise pollution, and reduce maintenance requirements as a result of excessive idling. Whereas Fleet Services recognizes that unnecessary vehicle and motorized equipment idling wastes fuel and generates needless harmful emissions. And whereas Fleet Services recognizes its responsibility to the public to be environmentally conscious, to ensure a consistent approach to vehicle and motorized equipment idling, all employees operating a city vehicle or motorized equipment must adhere to the following limitations, which you can see on the screen. Am I Idling and How's My Driving programs allow organizations to mitigate wasteful practices and potential risk by leveraging comments from concerned motorists to identify undesirable driving behaviors. These behaviors can directly impact bottom line expenses and expose organizations to accidents and lawsuits. Fleet Services has reviewed costs of having an outside organization administer these types of programs. However, it was found to be cost prohibitive. With the identification of a CI project pertaining to administrative pooling, there is an opportunity to provide this service in-house without overloading the current customer service staff. Our recommendation is to have this presentation received and filed. Thank you for your time this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding Fleet Services.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. In considering owning the vehicles or leasing them, we own most of our vehicles.
Yes, that is correct.
How many do we lease? Do we lease?
Currently, I believe we have 3 leased vehicles in our fleet.
That's it.
That's correct.
Okay, we have some questions, Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Deputy. Kevin, under fuel management, we talked about this before, I think, but are we buying with the province of New Brunswick for bulk rate for fuel?
It's through, I believe it is. It's through Irving, so I believe it is the provincial contract. I'm sorry.
The provincial contract? Okay, thanks.
That it?
Yep.
Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I don't know if it's directed at you or at the, well, I guess he left, the city manager. Anyway. I'm wondering if we know, we have so many vehicles and everything, and I'm wondering, do we know if we need that many vehicles? Because if I owned a business, I'd know what I know. So do we, if I need 10 vehicles, 3 vehicles, do we have a study on that? Or how do we know we need 50 vehicles or 20 trucks or?
Through you, Your Worship, Councillor. So with the utilization projects, we actually look at, we get into the service areas and we see what they utilize the vehicles for. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do. So for an example, with the carpooling, we recognized that we had more vehicles than we needed when we actually went to the service areas and tried to understand how they utilize them. So what we're trying to do is, through the utilization project, understand exactly what they're using them for, see if there's opportunities to actually either share, coordinate, or pool them, and trying to reduce that scope that we currently have with regards to equipment. We're trying to be quite aggressive in reducing our fleet. We recognize that we do have a lot, and the perception is there that there is a lot. And it's through these different projects. So the first one being utilization 1.0, we did reduce by 15 vehicles at this point. We are looking at the heavier equipment and into the trucks now to see where we can continue on with that reduction.
Yeah, thank you, because I mean, it's a major expense to any company, doesn't matter who it is, in a city, the vehicles. It's not just buying the vehicle. The buying the vehicle is almost cheaper when you got to maintain, and it costs you a friggin' fortune.
Through you, Your Worship, when we did the last utilization 1.0, we found that it was costing us about $9,000 a year per vehicle in maintenance, with all of the costs that come with it.
All right, so you'll bring us an update again, and probably...
Through you, Your Worship, yes, when I'm requested.
Okay, thank you. Oh, okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Deputy. Just reflecting on the presentation, Kevin, former Councillor Farron probably would have loved it, and he kept reminding councils, our vehicles are costing us money. And the Mercury report, the other piece of this that kind of slid through very quickly because you had a lot of information for us, is much of the work we are doing is based on the recommendations from an outside consultant. Often governments are accused of going out and getting a consultant's report and putting it on the shelf. Could you talk a little bit about, just, you were on the last 3 recommendations, but some of the pieces of the Mercury report, how long we've been working, pulling things from that, and some of the other things that have come out of that we've already implemented?
Through you, Your Worship. So the last 3 recommendations have, 2 of them have to do with our actual fleet locations, so Rossay Avenue and the East Garage, and it basically stated that the conditions weren't optimal for where they were at. So we are working on a project currently to look at relocating. It's still in the early stages, but we are on that. The third recommendation has to do with training, and that's something that we are working on as well. With regards to the previous recommendations, one of the major ones was the fleet policy, which you adopted in 2017. That cleared a number of them off. Ian, do you want to speak to any more of them? Okay. Oh, the business model.
Yeah, through your worship, the other one was really the business model. A lot of the recommendations had to do with that direct billing and with the policy. So all that was implemented. We're now seeing the fruits of that. The information system is also another piece. So we're able to measure the KPIs of what our fleet is doing, how it's performing. With those three big initiatives we covered off, 28 out of 31 recommendations of the Mercury report.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Deputy.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Kevin, how much can be saved, on an annual basis with an idling policy?
So an initial report that we did on one vehicle, it was approximately $1,000 a year. That's if we reduced all of its idling through the entire year.
$1,000 per vehicle?
Per vehicle. So if you're being holistic, we have 300 vehicles, $1,000 a vehicle. An idling policy could be as much as 300,000, but that's if you eliminated all idling. In some cases, equipment require idling, so if you have inverters or things like that connected to the vehicles, if they're doing certain digs and things like that, you wouldn't be able to eliminate that.
Okay, so ideally, the best case scenario, $300,000. Is it possible to shoot for half of that, $150,000 annual savings?
With the policy, we're hoping to reduce it significantly. When you're looking at what our budget is for fuel, it's about $1.7 million a year. We'd like to see that reduced. To quantify it right now, we're still waiting for the AVL data to come in. Yep. So we're still so the estimates that we're getting are on vehicle data that we have. We don't have all that data yet, so I wouldn't want to lead you down a path that I'm not going to give you a proper answer.
Can you lead me down a path that would give me a projected date on when we might receive that data?
The AVLs should be installed by the end of June, we're hoping. With that, we'd have database collection in the following months. To be able to tell. Now, one of the things that does come into play is, again, not all of the vehicles are utilized all through the year, so as we get into when they're used and how they're used, you'd want a full year's data to actually get a true number on what your idling reductions would be.
Just one other question on that. Not with the idling. Do we have, do any of our employees use personal use vehicles? I shouldn't say personal use, their own personal vehicle, and then we just reimburse them for that mileage?
So the policy that was put in 2017 put a reduction to that. So what we're trying to do is with the vehicle pools is actually have staff use city-owned vehicles.
Sure.
One of the things that came out of utilization 1.0 was we weren't putting enough kilometers on our vehicles, and they were actually rusting out before they were being driven out. So we're trying to increase the kilometers instead of giving it to our staff. So basically, when you have a kilometer charge, that's paying for their insurance and their gas and other things. Well, we're already paying for that with our own city vehicles, so we're trying to encourage that use on our own city vehicles so that we actually reduce those costs. And that's one of the other things that we're trying to do with regards to the rentals. We're trying to reduce our costs by bringing them in and using the pool vehicles that we have available.
In that scenario that you just mentioned, because of the significant reduction in using city-owned vehicles, and they're just sitting there rusting away essentially, we've been better off with the other policy? We've been better off in the scenario where employees could charge the city for?
No, so we'd actually see higher costs.
We would.
So you still have to provide vehicles on a daily basis for staff to perform their daily tasks.
Okay, thank you for that.
And that's where so it's just optimizing the time in which those cars aren't being used and allowing people that would have previously used personal mileage, but they're now using vehicles that we already have.
Okay, last question. The vehicles, for example, the vehicles that are, I don't know where I am here. The vehicles that are, I think, right there. Am I looking on the right side of the building? Yeah, the garage. I mean, I go in there. I never knew we had all those vehicles, to tell you the truth. I know we had all those vehicles till, the building was bought, and then all those vehicles had to come out of the garage, I assume, where they were in the basement of this place. Moved into there. I just came in one day and I just saw a sea of white, and they're very clean, by the way. I mean, with all those, do we pay for parking space for all those vehicles?
Through you, Your Worship. Currently, we are paying for parking spaces with those vehicles. I think what's important to recognize is we had all those vehicles prior, even them being in the basement. They were on the second level of the parking garage. But that was actually part of the first utilization project. And we took all of the hours and when they're booked and kilometers, and we reduced those by actually 14 vehicles. So we've actually reduced that down and increased the kilometer on the vehicles that you see there now.
Oh, that's good, because we don't have enough parking for all that. That's excellent. So how much are we spending on parking spaces for all those right now?
I believe it's $85 per space.
Is it $85 per month?
That's correct.
What would the annual, okay. We own parking lots, right?
That is one thing that we are currently doing. So with a different project that's being done by CI, the City Hall the City Hall restack, some of those different parking questions are being answered. We are moving a lot of city staff to our own parking garages as opposed to paying a third-party provider.
All right. You want to go first? Okay. I kind of like this CI thing. We could keep on going, but the cameras are rolling. We've got a parking lot, right? Thank you, Your Worship. Okay.
City Manager.
Your Worship, to the councillor, just to be clear, our ideal is that all city-owned vehicles and all parking for managers who may have access to parking will be in city-owned lots moving forward. There is some challenge with that because, of course, you get more money from daily use and hourly use than you do from our monthly use. So there's a balancing as to where we put them, but we do have Peel Plaza, we do have other locations, and we are moving to that, and all of that will be in place by the end of the year as part of the continuous improvement. To answer your other question about how much are we going to save, we don't know exactly, but I can tell you that in terms of our financial sustainability work for next year, we are aiming at $100,000 saving through the no idling policy.
Okay, Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to go back to this idling policy because, so how many minutes on average would a car idle to save $1,000 a year?
Through Your Worship, I don't have the data in front of me. I wouldn't want to give you an incorrect answer. When we did the initial review, it was with Samir Yamin, who's the energy manager, and he went through it and went through that particular vehicle, and that's how we came to it. Again, this vehicle was a vehicle that is utilizes inverters and things like that, so it had the potential to be a higher idling vehicle, but we just wanted to see what the dollar rate would be on that vehicle.
Okay. I mean, just for the average person out there, you know, when you're stopping to pick somebody up and they're going to be 5 minutes, shut it off. You know, you're going to save yourself a lot of money. All right, thank you very much, Kevin. Great report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sullivan.
Just a quick one, Deputy, and really not a question, just another important point we haven't talked about here. We talked a lot about becoming more financially responsible. Not lost on me or probably anybody on this council is just the environmental responsibility that comes along with it. You know, as we're saving money, which is good for our taxpayer, the reduction in carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases that we're putting in through all of this, you know, I'd be happy if we had null improvements financially and we just continued to be more environmentally sustainable. So fantastic work on the financial side, but also certainly not lost on me, and I'm sure the rest of council, is that environmental piece that goes along with it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I just have a question on our cars and our small trucks. How do we measure? We measure it by mileage or by age before we send them to the auction?
We have a calculation, what's called an optimal replacement point. It's an ORP, and it looks into the maintenance on the vehicle, the age of the vehicle, the kilometers on the vehicle, and our fuel costs for the vehicle. So there's different indexes within there, and as those indexes reach a certain point, that's when we go to a replacement value. So if we're seeing one of those categories that's increasing at a higher rate, we may push that vehicle ahead, just knowing that there's going to be greater costs moving forward, or it could be a vehicle that it's getting older, but it's not causing us a lot in maintenance. We can reduce that down the list. So we're constantly re-looking at that list, and prior to bringing a fleet purchase to council, we look at those lists and those numbers to ensure that the vehicles that we are replacing are the ones that should be replaced.
Okay, thank you. And you know, all the vehicles in the garage, like lots of days, they're all there. So does that mean that we're not using them? Or do we need them all?
So different times throughout the year, we are going to see times when there's a higher utilization versus a lower utilization, and that would go back to, in a lot of cases, to the service areas and the work that they performed. Based on the initial utilization 1.0 project, we had reduced the vehicles down by 14 because we saw that we could reduce that number, or sorry, by 11. We've now looked at the fall, or the last fall and into this winter, the utilization. We're recognizing that there's an opportunity to reduce some more vehicles, but we also are cognizant of the fact that in the summer, vehicles at this location will get used more. So we're trying to play that fine balance of making sure we have the right number to allow the service areas to continue to meet their service demands, but at the same time keeping our level as low as possible so that you're not seeing a lot of vehicles in the parking lot.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin and Ian, for your presentation. So I don't see any other questions, so can I have a receive and file motion?
Second.
On the question, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried. Common clerk, please.
Your worship, item 12.4 on the agenda is a staff report and presentation on spring freshet emergency response, and the fire chief will introduce this.
Okay, we have Chief Kevin Clifford.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Common Council. I'm here before you tonight as the Director of St. John EMO. Hard to imagine that spring is just around the corner or is here, but as everyone recalls, during the spring of 2018, the City of St. John experienced a record-setting flood as part of the annual spring freshet. The spring freshet of 2018 was unique in our history and necessitated an applicable yet unique emergency response from St. John EMO for the citizens of the St. John community. As we approach this year's and future years' spring freshets, and after discussions with the city manager, St. John EMO believes it's prudent to adopt a spring freshet emergency response policy, which clearly outlines what actions the citizens can expect from St. John EMO given particular flood levels. I will ask two individuals, invaluable individuals, both now and in our past flooding of our St. John EMO team, Monica Boudreau, who's the Operations Manager, Transportation Environment, Mike Carr, who's Manager of St. John EMO and one of the Fire Department's Division Chiefs, to provide a brief overview of the proposed spring freshet emergency response policy that is before you tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, Chief Clifford. Good evening, Your Worship and members of Common Council. The purpose of the Spring Freshet Emergency Response Policy for the City of St. John is to define the parameters that would initiate an emergency response to floodwater conditions during the annual St. John River Spring Freshet and the resources and services the city would provide. The Emergency Management Framework of Canada states that the responsibility to be prepared for disasters, including mitigating flood risk, is shared by all levels of the government, their partners, and individual citizens. The process of issuing sandbags to residents was a first in 2018, prompted by the unprecedented flooding. And the reason sandbags were used was the fact that the 2018 flood required an emergency response because of the extraordinary circumstances. Over the last 45 years, we've only seen flood levels with severe impact 3 times. 1973, 2008, which St. John EMO and the city had a full response, and 2018, in which we're all familiar with. Therefore, in order to enhance response to these flood levels or higher, and to mitigate the potential impacts on critical infrastructure and residential property, it is proposed that the lowest severe flood level of 2008 be used as the trigger to initiate an emergency response to spring freshet flooding. This table shows the actions that will be taken depending on the projected flood levels. 4.2 meters is the official flood level in St. John, which has minimal impact on our city. 4.7 may require an increased response, and 5.2 meters, which is the level from 2008, would be considered a flood emergency response level and would trigger a full activation of St. John EMO in the establishment of sandbag distribution centers. To add context, 5.2 meters was the flood level on day 2 last year when St. John EMO was fully activated and roads were just starting to be affected. St. John has the benefit of observing conditions upriver and using the lead time to prepare. Between the 3-day forecast from the province and the 3-day delay before floodwater reaches St. John, we would have a better part of a week to prepare if flood levels are projected to hit the flood emergency response level. Now, Monica Boudreau from Transportation and Environment will explain the implementation.
Thank you.
So with regards to implementation, our plan going forward is that filled sandbags will be available through our distribution centers. So you may recall last year, 2018, we had 3 distribution centers, one of which was at our salt depot on Bay Street over on the west side. We had another one at the KBM, which is on the Westfield Road. And then our third was at the North Depot on McIntosh. So we had those 3 locations open for citizens to come and grab sandbags. Most of our preparation for sandbags was done at our salt storage facility on Bay Street, and then we moved the sandbags to the other 2 locations. So our goal here is to have people, when the 5.2 is reached, come to our facilities, up to 3, and depending on the flood, it may be 1, it may be 2, or it might be 3. If it was as big as last year, we would probably open 3. And we would have our citizens come and pick up sandbags. Now, our main goal is to ensure that there's no hazards for our citizens. So we intend to have citizens come, pick them up, and we'll load them as necessary. They'll tell us how many sandbags they want, and we will load their vehicle for them. This year we've actually purchased an automated sandbag filling machine, so that will help us fill more sandbags than we could manually, so that will be an addition to our operation. So when it comes to the recovery phase, last year we did pick up debris for citizens. We asked them to, divide it up. So the citizens divided it up by white goods, sandbags, and then construction material. And then we picked it up. So we had 2 weeks where we picked up material. And the main thing that we asked citizens to do was to bring it to the curbside because we can't go onto private property. So that was something that we asked citizens to do, and it worked very, very well. So going forward, we'd like to see the same thing happen if possible. One thing I should mention, and the reason why we're here today speaking of this, is during this time of the year, April and May, we do have a Blitz program going on, and we have a lot of work that we do. The Blitz program is typically 3 to 6 weeks, and it includes potholes, sweeping, shouldering, and things like that we need to get done in the spring. So last year when the spring happened, we dedicated a lot of time and employees to the flood response, and our Blitz suffered a little bit. So moving forward, we want to have these in place so we can ensure that we're prioritizing things because our Blitz program is very, very important, and we need to get that done. But we also recognize that floods are important too, and we need to help citizens when that's due. With regards to costs, cost is another thing that to consider as well. Last year we used 44,000 sandbags. So at 75 cents approximately per sandbag plus the cost of sand, the cost was about $40,000 to provide those sandbags. Moving forward this year, we do have approximately 30,000 sandbags left over. So if we did the math on that and we estimated how much sand we could use or we would need to use, it would be about $17,000. So the cost with regards to these sandbags is quite high. So something to consider as well. So with that being said, the main reason why, I mean, we want to help citizens, absolutely, and we realize that, but at the same time we have a blitz program that's very, very important, potholes that have to be filled, streets that need to be swept, so we want to be able to prioritize the two things together. So we hope with what we're proposing here today that you will recommend or adopt the spring freshet emergency response policy.
So you're open for questions now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Thank you for the presentation. I think this is great, this, having an emergency response, because after the response last year was led by the chief was absolutely fantastic. And I know it's a cost, but you know what? When someone's drowning, who looks at costs? Seriously. I know it's $40,000, but guess what? Someone losing their house or flooding their basement, I'll kick in the 40 grand as a taxpayer, because I think there's no better cause when helping your fellow man when they're in deep trouble. And last year proved it. So many people helped out, and Chief Clicker can talk to it about day and night, and everybody else, everybody was there. So I'm all for it. I'm only asked one question. Usually people get flooded are the same people that get flooded every year. So when they take the sandbags for free, and they come back each and every year, what's happening to the sandbags from the year before is all I'm asking. And you can nitpick all you want. I don't want to try and nitpick, but do they reuse the sandbags? Are they allowed to keep the sandbags?
Through your worship, no, because they're contaminated, we have to dispose of them at the Crane Mountain site. So we had to dismantle all of them and bring everything to the dump site just because of the contamination. So
what's the contamination? Explain that to me.
It could be E. coli, chemicals, anything in the water that may affect the sandbags. So it's just a human hazard and a hazard itself. So we don't know exactly what was in the water, but there were dogs that got sick prior to or after the flooding, if you may recall, in Fredericton. So we just have to be very cautious that we're disposing of them properly.
All right. I think this is a great thing, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. City Manager.
Your Worship and members of Council, just two very quick points of clarification. The provision of the establishment of our sandbag distribution centers and the provision of sandbags free of charge is when we hit emergency response flood levels. So to be somewhat unkind, the house that floods every year and they're in a floodplain, that's no longer an emergency response. There needs to be prior planning and preparation for that household, for that near routine, very unfortunate, but near routine situation. The other aspects with sandbags, being somewhat of an expert due to my military background, the issue with sandbags is they also deteriorate very quickly. So to try to use a sandbag the following year, even if it has not been in contact with water, is very problematic, because when you go to pick it up, it's probably going to disintegrate in your hands. So they really are a one-time use thing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the report. I think it's a great report, great policy. I guess my thought process is we're helping citizens who, in many cases, especially lately, have never been flooded before. Because, like I can tell you, Millage Avenue, the boat club there. I mean, it was crazy, halfway up the Millage Avenue. So when people say, well, they shouldn't live there, they're getting flooded all the time. Well, if they're getting flooded all the time, then that's a different situation than what we're talking about now, as the city manager just explained. So my mind is going in this direction. We're trying to help people mitigate the damage to their homes by floodwaters. We should be approaching insurance companies saying, do you want to help us help you? Because if they want to throw in, as a group of insurance companies, $50,000 into a pot for sandbag, it's going to come back for them in savings, right? So I think what we should be doing, and I agree, when you're talking about, people's lives and their homes and all that sort of thing, I think it's a small price to pay. But regardless, I think that insurance companies would be looked at in a very favorable way if they got on board with this, because this isn't going away, folks. This is only going to get worse. So I think that it's great. I think what we should do is try to partner with some insurance companies and say, what are you willing to do in this operation, and go from there. But thank you very much for coming in. Great.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reardon.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you for the report. I'm happy to see it's come so swift on the heels of the last flood. And I think to have the triggers are so important for everyone, and because I think everybody remembers what 5.2 meters looks like now. We know what that number is, what it means for our homes. So without it, it's a guessing game of whether you should go forward or not go, or be criticized for starting too early or not starting soon enough. So I like to have that definite number there, and so it's great to see it, and it's great to have it so soon after the last flood. So really appreciate all the work in it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan.
Thanks. I'll move the recommendation. I don't think we've got it on the floor yet. Councillor McKenzie, I think, raises a perfect point and beat me to it. $40,000 in sandbags is one house. That's the insurance claim on one house whose basement gets destroyed. And I think there must be an opportunity here and personally, if you want to print your logo on the sandbags and give us the money to do it, doesn't matter to me, but I think there's some money to be had, and really Councillor McKenzie's point is bang on. And just for Councillor Armstrong's education, flood events of this size overpower some sewage lagoons, and I know is very aware that the Yacht Club last year doing a lot of cleaning, so those are very, very contaminated bags, and I'm so glad we have this policy, and again, just other things that we are doing as a city to recognize the fact that these are no longer 1 in 100 year events. The new reality with climate change is to expect more of these, and for us to continue to be prepared and make sure and have triggering points and a plan. That's just smart business. So thanks to staff for bringing this forward.
Thank you. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Worship. Monica, the city will also pick up those sandbags after they're disposed of. Am I right? Does it say that somewhere? I thought I read that.
Yes, we will. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, in terms of the sandbag, I understand how much it costs for the product, for the disposal. What are the tipping fees and things like that? What are the associated costs with that?
I'm not exactly sure, because last year we did not pay tipping fees. Crane Mountain.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they had exclusive hours for the disposal of that as well.
Exactly.
So, correct.
Yeah. So we didn't pay anything last year. It's something I can follow up on. I'm not exactly sure.
Would you mind? I don't know if it was discussed here or not. I think that's important, and I want to, just because I'm asking the question doesn't mean I'm not in support of extending this olive branch. I'm very supportive of it. I think it's absolutely excellent, but I think it's also important to get all the associated costs out there. So having the associated fees, whether it's, I would appreciate just knowing what the tipping fees are, and the reason why I say that is I don't think we can always bank on somebody giving us that extra.
Yeah.
That extra hand. So I think it's important from a policy perspective and a public perspective to know what it costs for the loader to go by, pick those up, put those in the truck them out, and then dump them. So disposal fees, I think, are key. maybe, Monica, this is a question for the city manager, but from a policy and practice perspective, one of the things I consider is if we're doing this for those impacted by catastrophic floods, which I'm supportive of, should we also be doing that, or are we going down the rabbit hole where, because one of the concerns I think we've had in exchange is during wintertime events where we have catastrophic ice events, because we've all around this horseshoe, we've mentioned that flood events are not like flood events of yesteryear, and ice events are different than the ice events that we had perhaps when I was a kid. But one of the questions and concerns I had from residents was, look, I don't ask the city for any sand for when there's floods, but the once in a blue moon that I need sand for a catastrophic ice event, we've had those. We had some serious ice events. The city closed the door on that. So what I'm requesting is if we're going to do it during one season for flood events, come the winter time when folks need sand for catastrophic winter events, and they're saying the same thing. I just need a couple bags of sand. I can't get any, or I need it for safety, or I need it for my sidewalk because they can't get out. I think an argument could be made. That's my opinion. I think a reasonable person could say that the argument could be extended to those events as well. So if that's the case, I would like staff to give that consideration. If we're going to be exclusive to flood events only and not consider those winter events, then what we're doing is we're providing a level of service, a subset of individuals that are affected because of their proximity to the water, a service enhancement that perhaps we're not paying to others as well.
Okay, I think
It's just food for thought, and I know I'm at my 3 minutes.
No, that's fine. I wasn't going to cut you off.
Okay.
But we have some staff that want to answer those questions, so
Okay.
so I don't know who wants to go first here. City manager?
I didn't know I was done my comments, but if
Oh,
I'm done my
I'll
comments,
come back
Deputy,
to you
please
then.
come. Okay, there we go.
Well, you want an answer to that question?
I do want an answer to that question. I didn't know we had an answer, so I'll take the
Okay.
answer, Deputy.
Your worship, to the councillor, 2 points I would want to make. The first one is the cost that we identified on the slide is the cost for our preliminary preparations. That is to say, go out and buy the sandbags and have the sand standing by. The cost to actually implement this policy will be much, much higher than that. In terms of, there's probably overtime. There is certainly perhaps tipping fees to dispose of debris, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wish to be clear that what we're talking about here is the precursor or the preparation costs. Most, if not all, of the costs, if we follow recent history, will be claimable after the event through the disaster emergency response of the province in terms of their funding back to us. All right, so the 16,000 you see there is for our preparations only, not the cost if we were to distribute sandbags. On the councillor's point about, this is a public safety issue. We only do it in emergency response, not routine response, and this is rightfully, as was rightfully pointed out, to do only with flooding. Yes, the city staff will take a look at, is there an emergency response situation in the winter time that would require some sort of policy for it as well. I would need to stress again that our role is to ensure the public safety, so it would need to be an emergency response trigger, not a routine snowstorm where someone wishes a bag of sand for their front sidewalk. But yes, we will take a look at that and come back to council prior to next winter season with some thoughts and recommendations as to whether a policy can be implemented and what that policy would look like.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add to that, Mr. Huguenots?
No, I think the city manager.
Okay. Councillor Norton, I go back to you. I just wanted you to get the answers.
So no, thank you, Your Worship. No, I appreciate that. I think the point has been made, and I look forward to something coming back in in 2019. And I think that's why we're also raising, or at least I was raising the fact that all those associated fees need to come back. So when we have a better idea what the fees are, you know, it's not our first time around this horseshoe. I know the fees aren't there. I know someone's operating that loader. Someone's operating the new sandbag fancy machine that's doing that. I know someone's gonna probably go pick up the bags, and there's a lot of costs that aren't depicted in the slide deck that we have. I just know that there's gonna be some citizens, and I agree with them, that if we're gonna do something for one subset, that we do something for another. And I don't think we can base our policies just on the hypothesis that we're gonna recoup the money through programs that are associated with EMO kickbacks. I think that what we have to do is we have to look at those other seasonal events that are happening. So I appreciate the city manager making a commitment to look at that, and look forward to seeing something hit the deck. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we've been around, but I just want to ask one question. And how do we, I think it's a great program. It's going to help a lot of people. Hopefully we won't have the situation this year and the flood, but if we do. How are you going to keep track of who gets the sandbags? I mean, I assume that this whole program is for citizens of the city of St. John. So do you have people sign in when they come, or just how are you going to do that? I mean, we're just, I assume the sandbags are just going to be for city citizens. So do you have to give your address? Do you have to say what type of situation you have? Or I think we should make that public. I mean, how can somebody come more than once? Can they ask for 100 sandbags? I mean, is there any rules on that, or?
We're in the midst right now of creating an SOP for this, so we're probably going to line that out in that. It's something that we definitely have to discuss, but at this point we're drafting the SOP, so it's not something that we've decided on yet. But yes, you're right that we want these sandbags to go to city residents, so we might ask for proof of address, something like that, but we haven't decided on that yet.
Okay, well, I think it's a great program. I hope it works, and I hope we really don't have to use it, but we'll have to wait to see on that. So thank you very much. The recommendation is on the floor. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried. Okay, we're going back to the common clerk for our next item. Just as soon as here you are.
Yes, Your Worship. Item 15.1 on your agenda is a request to purchase tickets for Rotary Club of St. John.
Yeah, okay. Moved and seconded to refer to the clerk's office and the common clerk's office, who will contact the councillor, see if they're interested on that motion. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried.
15.2, Your Worship, is another ticket purchase request, Kennebecasis Valley Oasis Youth Center.
Same motion. Do I have a seconder? So it's referred to the common clerk's office, who will contact the councillors individually. On that question, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried.
15.3, Your Worship, another ticket purchase request for St. John Canada Celebrations Committee.
That would only need a receive and file motion because we have already donated $15,000 towards it. Second. On that question, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried. Now we go to the add-on items.
That's correct, Your Worship. Item 16.2 was a request with respect to the May Day dinner to purchase tickets for the May 1st event at Lily Lake Pavilion.
Same motion referred to. Okay, on that question, referred to the common clerk's office. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried.
And Your Worship, the final item is a recommendation coming from Committee of the Whole, and it's with respect to, it's 17.1 on your agenda, and it's with respect to sale of city land on Mecklenburg Street.
Have somebody move the recommendation? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. On the question, all those in favor? Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried. Do I have somebody that wants to adjourn the meeting? Move adjourn. on that question. Thank you very much to everybody that presented tonight. Thank you.
Bad. I said 9:30. But I didn't factor in the new 10-minute rule. So that was a difference maker.
You were wrong again.